good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to now formally welcome you all to this Photon and Neutron EOSC Symposium that is jointly organized by PaNOSC and by ExPaNDS. My name is Florian Glixen. I'm an Associate Director at ELI, the Extreme Light Infrastructure. Our initial intention was to hold this symposium both on site, where I stand here in the south of Prague, Czech Republic, and online. And for obvious reasons, we had to reconsider our plans, and we are eventually meeting only online today. This is maybe actually for the better, since we have, as far as I know, a total of 199 registrants. So not everyone on board. We're still missing some of them, but I suppose they will join in the next few minutes. And so registrants from 24 countries. And I looked at the list, and we have quite a many actually from outside Europe as well, which is interesting. So very, very happy to have a format today that allows very wide attendance in terms of number and geography. I'd like to say a few words first about our ambition for today and the program of this afternoon. You may have noticed that we advertised this event as a symposium and not as a conference or workshop. I cannot recall exactly what we had in mind when we chose the term, but I checked the etymology, and when I found out that the symposium refers to a drinking party in ancient Greek, the word, I figured out it was not pure coincidence, even though online that's going to be difficult for us to stick to the etymological sense of the word. Anyway, joke aside, today's event is meant to be an opportunity for all of us to reflect on both the challenges and perspectives of fair, open data and open science in general for the photon and neutron user communities in the EOSC context. Those communities are diverse, wide-ranging, in their requirements. PaNOSC first, the Photon and Neutron Open Science Cloud, and ExPaNDS, the European Open Science Cloud Photon and Neutron Data Service, are two EC-funded projects that are well engaged in their implementation and that are precisely working on promoting the adoption of fair practices at the facilities that serve these communities, and are developing the associated data services that will allow users to leverage open data. Of course, this effort takes place within the context of EOSC, the European Open Science Cloud, which is now gaining momentum with the development of core services and the establishment of a more sustainable governance. So we have designed today's program around 3 sessions. In the first session, the coordinators of ExPaNDS and PaNOSC, Patrick Fuhrman and Andy Goetz, will give an overview of what these 2 projects are trying to achieve for the photon and neutron user communities. We'll then have a panel session with 4 distinguished panelists representing ESFRI, EOSC, EOSC Hub, and the European Commission, who will reflect on the future of EOSC and the perspectives for our users. And they will then have a more hands-on session, I would say, with 2 scientists whom we consider to be open data or fair champions, who will share some of their experience in this respect. So in terms of timing, we plan to close the meeting around 5 p.m. Central European time. We'll have a short coffee break after the first session. We will try to make this afternoon as participative and interactive as possible. So Kat, my colleague, has already told you a bit about how this will be managed. So again, we're inviting you to submit your questions in the Q&A part, not in the chat box. So before we move on and start with the first session, I'd like to thank you once again for your participation. I'd like to thank also the colleagues of ExPaNDS and PaNOSC who have contributed to putting this event together within the framework of the program committee, as well as the speakers and panelists that you'll hear this afternoon who have accepted to participate. We are very happy at ELI to host this meeting. It's for ELI very timely and meaningful. We are a large-scale facility, a large-scale laser infrastructure with presence in Central and Eastern Europe. It's now entering into initial operations. We'll be serving a large community of users coming from various disciplines: medicine, biology, chemistry, material sciences, astrophysics in the lab. And we have world-leading laser technology we'll rely on. But we know that our success also depends on our capacity to give our users efficient tools to access data, but also to leverage these data to get faster to publication and new discoveries. So with that said, I'd like maybe that we launch the first session, unless Kat, maybe you want to repeat the instructions that or indications you gave earlier if we have more attendees. If not, then I will pass to Sophie Servant from DESI, who will be the facilitator and moderator for the first session. Thank you very much, and I wish us all a very interesting and interactive afternoon.
Thank you very much, Florian. So I'm very happy to be introducing our two favorite coordinators for this first session on all you need to know about PaNOSC and ExPaNDS. So starting with Patrick. Patrick is the coordinator of the ExPaNDS project. He's head of the DESI Research and Innovation in Computing Group here in Hamburg, where he is very appreciated, and not only because he makes us cookies all the time. He has a background in high energy physics, big data, and storage access, being highly involved, for instance, in WLCG. He's teaching big data analytics at the University of Applied Science in Berlin. For 17 years, he led the international Dcache collaboration, providing storage solutions, providing storage solution for over 70 scientific laboratories worldwide. He's been highly involved in EU projects, for instance, the European Middleware Initiatives, also the Extreme Data Cloud, and now in addition to ExPaNDS, he's particularly involved in ESCAPE and the ESCAPE project. He's usually traveling a lot, but now instead he's transforming his house into what I believe is becoming a highly sophisticated smart home. So now to Andy. Andy is the coordinator of the PaNOSC project and work package leader for data policy and stewardship. He is group leader for software at ESRF, where he is very appreciated, although apparently he never brings cookies, a point I was asked to strongly make. He has a background in computer science, radio astronomy, and open source software development. He is currently leading the implementation of the data policy at ESRF, where he's worked for 30 years with two brief escapes, one back to astronomy and the other one back to a neutron source. He's passionate about scientific data management and helping scientists make the most of their data. He's also a great meditator and appreciates the joys of the mountain. We can only wish him a very good corona-proof ski season now. So just to mention that both worked very hard on this presentation, so please reward them with good questions in the Q&A that we will ask for you at the end of the talk. Thanks very much, and Patrick, the floor is yours.
Okay, good. So I try to share my slides with you. I guess that's fine.
Yes, we can see them. It's perfect.
Perfect, perfect. So thank you very much, Sophie. That was very kind of you and very nice. So I would like to join the welcome for every one of you, the PaNOSC and the ExPaNDS team, our invited guests, and particularly our POs, Pilar, Christian, and René, and whoever joined us. Good. So this presentation is shared between Andy and myself. Before we start, I would like to thank the organizer team of this meeting. They did a very good job in keeping us on track, trying to avoid accidents here. Good. So next up is again my special thanks to the Eli people, because they were really looking forward to meet us all in Prague, but this unfortunately didn't work out. Nevertheless, they put a lot of effort into organizing this meeting. So thank you very much. Good. Now, as I said, this is a shared presentation. We will talk a little bit about what the PaN community is, what the facilities are, what we do with the beams, and then Andy will take over and will guide you through a lot of very, very interesting use cases, and he will make sure that you understand that use cases is the part which is driving our community and those two projects. That will be a really bumpy ride because he picked a lot of use cases, and then we move into the project work and achievements and so forth. Okay, Andy, would you like to join the welcome to our
yes,
audience?
Yeah, I would. Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So yes, I mean, while I was preparing, firstly, I would like to thank my co-presenter, Patrick, who did a fantastic job reviving Charlie Brown. and with the slides. I can see he's a perfectionist, you'll see. And secondly, I'd also, in addition to thanking the team, I'd like to thank Eli. I was actually many times by preparing, you think of, there's this presentation, this annual symposium is very important. I pictured myself standing in the auditorium at Eli Beam Nights. I have been there a few times and I really love that place. I liked standing there, and I feel as if I'm almost there now. I can almost taste the Czech beer. So we look forward.
Good. So, okay, good. Before Andy is then completely drunk, let's move on. So this is a little bit on the PaN Superbook of questions and answers, but we make this very, very short because we know that you are the experts and I'm not. So it's a funny situation I'm in. Good. So just to give you an overview, we have two kinds of particles which we are using to investigate our probes. The first one are the photons and the other are the neutrons. For the photons, what we do is we can use them in synchrotrons. So we are using the Bremsstrahlung in order to create photons from the electrons. Or what we can do is in the free electron lasers, what we have an accelerated electron, we give them a little nudge. And here the same, we have Bremsstrahlung. And so this is converted into a very, very brilliant and short pulse. Or we have conventional laser like Eli, where we excite the electrons and wait for them to fall down into their orbits, and they produce light. For the neutrons, they mostly interact not with the hull of the atom, but with the nucleus. So we have the conventional reactors, which are creating nucleons, or neutrons, or we have the spallation sources where we somehow convince a kernel to admit a neutron. So this is very, very short. What we do. Andy, you would like to elaborate a little bit on the upgrades of this facility?
Yeah, just to say that all the pictures you see are either new sources or sources that are going through a major upgrade. And this is a case for almost all photon sources in Europe. So I think, and maybe worldwide. So we are facing, all of us, with the new challenge because we want to go to the next level. Yeah?
Exactly. So although the community is not a very new community, but we are currently upgrading to the most brilliant sources. Good. And so what are we doing with this? We are doing a lot of things. So the communities which are attached to photon neutron are enormous. So the conservative way is we take a crystal and we shoot photons on a crystal, and what you get is the diffraction pattern, or this is the Fourier transformation of the actual picture. And then you have to do a lot of calculation, which we come to in a couple of slides, in order to reconstruct the protein model by seeing the electron density map. This is one possibility. The disadvantage is you're shooting on the same crystal all the time, which can cause the crystal to be damaged, and you are not really taking the picture of the same crystal then. This can be avoided by serial crystallography. So what you do is you have a stream of probes, and it doesn't matter that you destroy them. There is a next coming. So, and this helps you. In this case, you don't have to freeze the probes. You can even have a very, very powerful laser, and it doesn't matter that the probe is destroyed. Or you have the photon tomography. This is not on the micro level. This is more on the picture level. So you can see parts of the body or whatever you want to see with it. Or you have the neutron tomography. I'm sorry. Here, as you can see from the clock, you don't really see the atom hull, but you see the kernel, the interaction of the neutron with the nucleus of the atom. And we do many, many more things, as you will see in a couple of slides. Good. Moving on. So what is the PaNOSC and ExPaNDS projects about? Okay, starting with PaNOSC. So this is now starting with the map of Europe, seen from LEAPS, which are most of the photon laboratories, and seen from LEAN, which are most of the neutron laboratories. So as you can see, there are a lot in the meantime. And so the green circles indicate the involvement of those facilities in PaNOSC. Now, as you can see, a lot is missing. Okay, if we extend this to the ExPaNDS facilities, now you see we cover Europe. And this is the intention, actually. And Andy, in a couple of minutes, will talk a little bit about the birth process of those two projects. Good. So, but the important for me is to understand that when we talk about the PaNOSC, ExPaNDS, PaN community, it's really most of Europe. Good. So, Andy.
Okay, so I mean, one thing is for sure, as you saw from that map, and as most of you know who've been involved in these communities, this is actually just one community. The Photon and Neutron community has been working for at least the last 20 years, but even longer together, because we share the same techniques in some cases, and we also share users in other cases. Yeah? Well, in those cases as well. And what was clear from very early on is that the real critical mass you need to work on a project of this kind is to be together. And I'll explain a bit, is that if you only have 6 partners, you won't necessarily have all the skill sets all the skills you need. And so by bringing together these 2 projects, we can have a critical mass of skills, people who are available to work on these projects as well, because that's also very demanding. Sometimes we all have very busy lives, we have busy programs in our own institute. So I think, you know, it was obvious that we had to be working together as one community. But now you could ask us, and this is a question which I was asked to answer as well, is why then do we have 2 projects? So if you go to the next slide, I can a little bit try and explain how the original call looked. The original call, if you look at this text over here, says, this topic will ensure the connection of the research infrastructures identified in the S3 roadmap to the EOSC. Support to this activity will be provided through cluster projects, gathering S3 projects and landmarks in a number of domains. While the S3 infrastructures represent the core component of any cluster, other relevant world-class research infrastructures with the European dimension established as ERICs or international organizations can be involved in a cluster. So from this text, there was a lot of discussion. It seemed to exclude the non-S3, non-CERIC sources, institutes, which was something that was seen as we wanted to be together because it's one community and we don't have enough masses, only 6 partners. It was generated a lot of discussion. And the discussion that was also the feedback coming back from the Commission was there will be a second call which will involve the non-S3 projects. Now, in some cases, what has also been noticed is that the other cluster, there are 5 cluster projects. The other cluster projects involve non-S3s as well. But the main reason for that, from my understanding, is if you look at these communities like Elixir, the social sciences, they already organized as an ERIC. So before this call came out, they were already working together on data. And in this ERIC, they had all the different institutes European-wide, and they applied together. And for me, well, first of all, the good news is that our whole community has been funded. And the second takeaway message from this is we should be getting organized, to my mind, in a similar fashion for the future. I think we sort of, in a way, we also paid a price that we worked together as PaN, what was called the PaN data collaboration 10 years ago. But when the EU money ran out, we then ran out of reason sort of for keeping this alive. And I think this is something we have to really think of for the future.
Exactly. Good. Thank you, Andy. Good. Now, a little bit on a little bit of a cheat sheet of the 2 projects. First of all, coming to the timeline. As Andy already mentioned, they started with PaNOSC first, and then we met in London from the ExPaNDS partners, and no one actually believed that we would succeed. And some of the partners are still upset about me because I said we won't, but we did. Good. Now, so we started with ExPaNDS, and just a technical detail, because we couldn't stand the fact that PaNOSC will be longer than us, so we asked for an extension, and now we will be the one which will succeed in the end, and not PaNOSC. Haha. Good. This is not so important. Important is that, and hopefully I get this to work, that beginning of next year there will be 2 new things coming up. One is a project and one is an association. Both will be very important for us. So it will be the EOSC association, and there will be discussions about the EOSC association in an hour from now. And secondly, EOSC future. And some of my colleagues did a great job in getting some of the PaN facilities into EOSC future, so that we can continuously work and advise the communities on our work. So.
Yeah, and I could just add, I mean, we in the PaNOSC and ExPaNDS call, the work was to connect to the EOSC, and the EOSC was represented by EOSC Hub. As you can see, it ends the end of this year. And so it's very important that there's a continuation after that. And we'll be hearing more about that from, I think, from our panelists.
Good. Then all the kind of nasty details, as Andy already elaborated about. So PaNOSC started through an infra EOSC 04, and ExPaNDS is an infra EOSC 5B project. PaNOSC got slightly more money than us, kind of double. It is 1 ERIC, it is 5 S3s and EGI, and ExPaNDS is 10 national laboratories and EGI, and we are the only thematic 5B project. Good. That's about that. Andy, do you want to add something on that?
No.
Okay,
no.
Perfecto. Good. So here is something Andy asked me to add. From that point on, so essentially today, we will move our focus a little bit from work on details, from preparation work, onto focusing on use cases. And this is what Andy will elaborate about in a minute. Good. So, but we are not living in a vacuum. Apologies, I have to click here. We're not living in a vacuum. We are encapsulated, of course. Before we became projects, our community was already part of various initiatives and other projects. For example, the Photon, as mentioned, were involved in LEAPS. Then we have LENS for the neutron facilities, and then there are other how to call it, initiatives like the Light Source, the Laser Lab Europe, or Wait for Light and neutron sources, where we advertised our work, the PaN work, before PaNOSC and ExPaNDS existed. Now, we, of course, connect to them. And our dissemination department, they have a very good connection to all those initiatives. On the left side, we have, as Andy mentioned already, the S3 cluster projects. And for ExPaNDS, kind of similarly, we have the other infra EOSC 5Bs. So with those, we share good practices. And particularly, there have been task forces created where we share good practice in coordination. We do landscaping, of course, very importantly, all the FAIR principles and what we can do in this direction. And about the services we would at some point like to put into the EOSC, and policies like data management plans and so forth. So this is essentially the landscape for us where we are embedded into. Just that you know that we are not just floating around. Good. And Andy's remarks here, yeah.
I could just add, I mean, the Commission learned something after the Infra EOSC 4 call, is they then, when they made the Infra EOSC 5B call, they imposed these task forces, I think. They were really encouraged and obliging these projects to work together. In the case of the clusters, this kind of contractual obligation didn't exist, but we do it on a non-contractual way. I think it could be stronger, and this is something where the EOSC could really help us strengthen this.
Yep. Okay, thank you. Good. That was that. Good. Now moving into the meat of the projects. So starting with FAIR. One remark from myself is, so FAIR by itself is not the end in itself, but it is a prerequisite for open science, and we want to achieve open science. If that could be achieved by something else, we would use something else. But FAIR is the way we are going in order to achieve this. This is just as a side remark for myself. Good. Now, this is a picture you all know. Everyone who has actually worked on a paper knows how this process goes. You start with a proposal, then you plan your data format, storage resources, your metadata, what you want to collect. Then you create the experiment, the measurements, you collect the metadata, which you defined beforehand, and then the process starts. You store the data, you validate the data, you visualize the data, and then the interesting part starts. You do the analysis and all the bits and pieces. And then in the end, if you have enough postdocs, you can end up with a paper. Good. So this is what it was before. Now, how can FAIR help to improve this? If all this is gone after the paper is gone, then a lot of money is wasted. So what we do here is, in applying the FAIR principles, is we do not store the data here, we save the data. We make sure it is available in the future. There's a lot of bits and pieces in IT behind that. It's complicated. Particularly, you have to store the data together with the metadata. Without the metadata, the data is losing its value. Good. So next step is you have to make sure that the data can be accessed. So you have to have mechanism to share the data. This might not be allowed right away. It might need half a year or 3 years. But after that, you will make it open access. And this, again, requires IT resources to do that. And that's not enough. What you want to make sure is that you can reuse the data. And that is why we're doing it. This is complicated, again, because you have to attract scientists to use your data again. So you do this by evaluating the impact of your research and advertise your data on platforms and so forth. You have to make sure that your data is permanently reviewed so that you're not advertising wrong things. And another branch into this is you have to make sure that you do teaching. This can be either on platforms or you go to universities like we do, and we attract young scientists to do the same process. Good. Now, FAIR is not coming for free. It has to be planned in advance by the facilities and by the users coming to the facilities. And therefore, one example for FAIR is that those facility users must provide data management plans, which we come to in a couple of slides, so that they are prepared and the facilities are prepared. So, Andy, do you want to add something here?
No, I just fully agree.
Perfecto. Good. Now, moving along the FAIR path, we make this short. There's a lot of information on this slide. Important is that both PaNOSC and ExPaNDS have been working on an extended data policy framework independently, although the PaNOSC people cheated a little bit because the ExPaNDS people cheated because the PaNOSC policy framework was already available, but we extended it to the needs of the national laboratories. All this said, the actual aim is to have a common approach to data policies across the photon and neutron research infrastructures. And the value is into making it compatible between the different facilities and to make it easier for the users to move around. We have more examples where we make it easier for them to move around, but in particular for the data management plan and the data policies. Andy?
Yeah, I can just say that we worked on these together. Especially, we were very lucky to get a lot of input from ExPaNDS colleagues. So this is, I think, the groundwork is laid for now coming up with a common framework for all of the institutes. Then, of course, it's a big step to convince management to change the existing policies or to adapt them. Yeah.
Exactly. That's another point. Okay, good. Andy, this is your slide.
Yes, I just wanted to show you how this is the first fourth generation synchrotron has gone online since the 25th of August, the ESRF EBS. And in our newsletter from December, you see FAIR has got a whole page dedicated to it. It was an interview by the journalist John Cartwright. And it shows how the FAIR principles are being transmitted and discussed with the scientific community. So there's stuff happening there, which I think is useful to be aware of and to see how this is trickling down into the scientific domains. That's it.
Okay, good. Now, how do we bring the FAIR principles to the experiments? Here again, there's a lot of information on this slide, which might or might not be important for you. Important is that we have to keep in mind that when you come to a facility, it's very important for both the facility and the users to make a contract. And this contract, part of this contract is the data management plan. And it's important so that both the facilities know which resources they have to reserve for you. And because this allows them planning reliability for you to provide the proper services. And on the other side, there is a kind of a contract that if you go to a facility, you know what they will provide and what they won't provide. And optionally, you can even extend this responsibility. And this is what we hope for beyond the end of the experiment. This is what it is all about. And this can include data stewardship. Important because at some point the experiment might go away, the PI is going away, and someone needs to take over the governance of the data, or compute resources. If it's for some reason you will not be able to move the data to your facility or to your home laptop, what would be nice if that the facility provides mechanisms to work on the data at the facility. Whether this is for free or you have to pay doesn't really matter. At least the functionality should be available. Good. And last but not least, there is the option that possibly the citizen science will be, might be there, so that people who are interested, maybe school class or whatever, will be able to do some experiments at the facility without downloading this huge amount of data, which usually is created. Good. Now, the last slide on fair data is what would be nice, of course, is if you come up with regulations on what fair is, it would be good if you would be able to check if the repositories which are there are really fair. What we can do is, of course, we can ask CAT to do this with all the facilities in Europe. Okay, but there might be better mechanisms. And so what happened is that the RDA came up with a kind of a nice list in the fair data maturity model, and they provided specification and guidelines what actually means fair data. And our colleagues from EOSC Synergy, they now provide plugins for repositories which automatically check if this particular repository is still fair. I don't want to go into details here. Similarly, EOSC Nordics, they are doing the same. So I joined their workshop. It was very, very interesting what they did. It's again based on the policy work from RDA, but unfortunately I didn't have time yet to check this in more detail. But this is very interesting work, which takes a lot of load from us, from humans, in order to check fairness.
Yeah, and I could just add, there's one of the experts and main authors of this machine actionable fair data policies is based in Prague, at the University of Prague. Yeah. We still have to meet him, but we will but next time we get there.
Next time, yes, it's more beer. Good, and now we are approaching a bumpy ride. Andy will guide us through a lot of use cases, but they are actually, this is actually the part why we do all this. Except number 7, that will be myself. Good.
Yeah, so I will go very quickly through these. First of all, I mean, we have to know why we're doing this. Who's going to use this? Where are there is a need for this, so that we're not, I don't know if some of you are aware, but often IT projects are criticized for being self-sufficient. They're doing it for themselves and not really for the users. Are we doing this for the users? And through the next 10 or 15 slides, I want to just illustrate where we have identified many cases already of how this is necessary. And just to start off with, one of the first things we're going to now do for the remainder of the project is gather use cases using a template, so that we can have input on the major use cases that we're addressing in a common format. So this template is just under revision now, and then we will make it available. And we have one example. Yeah, this was an example which was given to me by, let's say, the request came from a scientist at ESRF, who's a very well-known scientist in her field, but she didn't know. They don't really care, the scientists, about PaNOSC. They care about their science and the services they need. So she sent me an email, with a long email with a list of things that she needed for her team. And that email can map exactly into a typical use case for PaNOSC and eventually the EOSC. And so this is just an example of how you can have a real use case The scientist doesn't need to know about the work packages, about the PaNOSC project or ExPaNDS project. All the scientist needs to have is a request for a scientific problem which needs data services. Okay, next slide. So yes, the first example I showed you there is this one, where we have some famous paintings. Now, just to reassure you, these paintings are not brought to a synchrotron. They actually, because it would first of all could be an insurance nightmare, cost a lot of money to transport these things, and seen as the beam is only a few microns large, you wouldn't want to put this whole painting in there. So what is done is a small amount of paint is taken and then analyzed here. And the idea is to get the 3D structure or 2D structure of the layers of paint. And that will help understand where the paint is being, where the paint is aging and how to preserve it. So it's quite a large field, preservation of old paint, old paintings. Yeah? And what they needed was they needed Jupyter notebooks because their data was coming off with the new ESRF source in HDF5 in a format which was a bit novel to them. And they wanted someone to gather all this data together, do the data reduction, convert it into sinograms, and then make out of that, make a 3D model. So this was the kind of work what we are promoting inside PaNOSC and ExPaNDS as a data service, the use of Jupyter notebooks, usually Python-based, and this is something it's now been done as part of the PaNOSC resources at ESRF, and the other examples similar to this in other institutes. So I think the impact of that, if you look at the next slide, go to the next slide. This is basically the kind of next slide. This is the kind of map that you will get. You'll get a map which shows you the different distribution of the different elements. And the scientists, their idea, what their request was, can I have this as a standard feature, or a standard set of scripts, which our users can get a guidebook, a handbook just to run them. And this is the kind of service they need. The next one, okay, next one is one which I have picked up from other institutes actually, is carboxysomes, which I found out also just this was an example I got from the ELI website, is that in 2014, there was an experiment done at LCLS, but also at ExFEL, and the data from this was published as open data. Just to tell you, if you didn't know this, these organisms, these are tiny cellular-like organisms, actually fixate. They capture up to 40%, are responsible for capturing up to 40% of the Earth's carbon. So they're very important for the climate warming issues that we are facing. But what I wanted to illustrate here is that this experiment produced this data and published it in a public portal, in a public data repository, which we'll be hearing more about later this afternoon from Felipe. But it just shows that there are already scientists who are publishing their data, but in different domain-specific portals. And the idea of PaNOSC and of ExPaNDS is to make this service, generalize the service for all of them. And then if you go to the next service, you'll see, well, this is the entry showing this data. This data should be linked back to the institute repository, so that we make sure that, ensure that with our searches, we can easily find this data. We know the provenance, and the credit also goes to the original institute in some cases if the data was taken there and processed there. Just if you go back to that last one, one thing that we'd like to do is, for instance, just type in carboxysomes ExFEL and find this data. Today, we're not there yet. And so the search API will help us do this. And the next example is also about sharing data. Yeah, we even have data that's been reused. And this data, I think I've frozen again. Let me get this unfrozen. So this data was not publicly available, wasn't in a repository. It was taken in 2011, but through personal connections, people could get the data and then reanalyze it this year. in the future, this kind of example shouldn't require special, let's say, connections to the authors. You should be able to find this data and then contact the authors. You shouldn't have to first know the authors, maybe. So this is something that we'll also address here.
And just to tell you that we have approximately 30 minutes left.
Okay, very good. Next one. So if we go to the next slide, these are two related experiments where one of them is studying how drugs get distributed in the brain. And the other one is doing a 3D mapping of the brain to follow the pathways. And these are examples of where the data is quite large and is we have the request, for instance, for the 3D mapping of the brain. We have a request to make all this data available as open data. So you go to the next one. Here you can see this is the cortex of a mouse, and in very high detail at micron resolution. This data is available already, and it links back to the original data which came from the ESRF. This is typically something that we want to generalize. If you go to and in some cases you need special viewing tools for us. So these are viewing tools which are available publicly, and it could be one of the use cases is to include these kind of 3D viewers as part of the PaNOSC portal. Next slide. So one use case that, we're all about remote access, yeah? Remote data analysis, giving access to remote. And what happened during the last 6 months, you're all aware, this has impacted us heavily, is the COVID virus. And some of the resources at the institutes got redirected to using the tools they were doing for remote data analysis for running remote experiments. And the best examples of these are the ones from ILL, the visa system, from Ceric Eric, Elettra. Here you can see the ILL tool running. If you go to the next slide, you'll see this here, that was running the experiment. Here we're running the data analysis and sharing the screen between the user and the scientist and the beamline scientist. Next one. This is an example from Ceric Eric at Elettra on the TwinMIC beamline, where they're doing the data analysis using software which comes from ESRF and is made available as a remote service. All of these things were allowed users to stay at home because of COVID and do the entire experiment. If you see the next slide, do the entire experiment remotely. They had full control of the screen and have a Zoom session open where they're talking to the beamline scientist. So you can see this is something where what was foreseen in PaNOSC was actually very beneficial to people who needed to do that. So finally, the final case is simulation. We have a special work package. It's a bit unique to PaNOSC, but it's of course available for the whole community, is taking simulation codes that are used in neutrons and photons and experiments to build a library called the Vinyl library. And you can see the publication there to find out all about it and how it works. This is being used already and is really a success story for me between ExFAL, ESS, Ceric Eric, Eli, and ESRF. If you go to the next slide, you can see this is how we're promoting the Jupyter Notebook by providing notebooks to run MaxTAS. And MaxTAS is the standard simulation tool for neutrons. This is now available as a notebook, and I think Mats will tell us more about this tomorrow or on Wednesday. Next slide. Yeah, you can see, okay, yeah, you can see this is running as a, again, a notebook running data simulation software. Next one. And the Ceric Eric, they even set up a service for Oasis. If you go to the next slide, users can run this to simulate the whole beamline or design a new one. These are typical use cases. Over to you.
Good, yeah, thank you very much. I found a use case as well. So when I recently checked scientific publications, Spiegel Online, for example, I found that there were some very interesting experiments people made. And it was kind of published not only in Germany in Spiegel, but some tabloids in the UK were publishing it. So I thought that was a very good example. So what the guys did is, you can see here, so they were beaming a photon to a bi-kernel molecule. So it has two nuclei, and they were shooting on the first one and then on the second one. And what happens is of course, it goes to the first one, it's emitting an electron. It's going to the second one, which is emitting an electron. So the question was, is nature seeing those two as one, or is there a slight time difference between the first emission of the electron and the second emission of the electron? And you do this by treating this as a double slit experiment. So, and this is what the guys did. It was done on Petra 3 at DAISY, and the customers were the University of Frankfurt. So this is all very interesting, but more interesting is that I called them because I was curious how they are storing the data. We found that the data, not only the publication, was stored in Zenodo. And of course, I wanted to know why. So I called Sven Grundmann, he's the PI, and he told me that they would not have considered to store the data in Zenodo only because the science publisher, they insisted in storing it in Zenodo. Otherwise, they would not have published it. Okay, so on the other hand, the guy, there is a very young team, they like the idea that the data is available to others. Interesting enough, they never heard about fair data before. So I asked him and I gave him some introduction into EOSC and ExPaNDS, and he said, okay, that's all very interesting, but it would be nice, and this is now really from the interview, it would be nice if those options would be given as soon as you submit a proposal in one of the portals, for example, and it would be nice if they wouldn't have to store it somewhere else, like in Zenodo, but that the data plus the publication are linked by a DOI, and that the data is stored locally, if this service is available, is indexed, and that the DOI is then generated automatically. So here we can see that the scientists at the Beamline, they really want to make the data public, but we do not yet give them the ability to do that. And therefore he found those two projects, of which he never heard before, extremely interesting. So he came back to us about this. Okay, so this is my example, a kind of a counter example where actually the FAIR principles are implied accidentally, not intentionally. Good. So you want to add something, Andy?
No, it's fine. Right? That's
okay. Perfect. Good. Now we have a couple of minutes left, and I would like to introduce you to what we did, starting in the two projects, starting with the dissemination. Dissemination is very difficult because I asked my colleagues to provide me some information of what they did, and I got tons of slides. So they really take their job very seriously, both projects. So I only took bits and pieces of what they provided, and the ones which are most loved by people is, of course, movies and videos. So from the ExPaNDS point of view, we published 3 videos. One, the introduction of photon neutron facilities, the benefits of fair data, and then, of course, because of the infectious diseases problem we currently have, one on infectious diseases. Go to our website and find the movie. The next one is very interesting. This is a very practical movie. This is how people can find out how to get one of these DOIs. All the publications are needed in the meantime. And here again, you just click on it and they tell you everything. On PaNOSC, going even more into the very practical part. So they provide 2 movies. The one is something which we urgently need in the future more than currently, is we need a common identity throughout the PaN community, plus in the future the entire EOSC. And there is a movie on the umbrella ID, which is an identity we can use consistently across all the facilities. And the next one is by a colleague of us, Hans Fangohr, on data analysis on the COVID problem. Good. So I would like to limit myself to those. Go to our websites, both PaNOSC and ExPaNDS, and you find plenty of material which you can browse. Good. Coming to teaching and training, this was already mentioned. This is essential. In order to get you young scientists and new scientists up to speed, you need something they can just check, dial into, and then try to find out what the different facilities are providing. If I have an idea in mind on a proposal, where would it best to go and what do I do there, and so forth and so forth. And the idea is now to have a PaN training portal. This will cover all the facilities in Europe and maybe even further. And here we need two kind of branches. The first is, of course, we need the content manager. And this is something which is currently in discussion. I got permission to mention that they're looking into a solution provided by Elixir, but this is not sure now. It would provide all the functionality we need, but there are others around. On the other side, what we need is the actual e-learning platform. So a lot of you, they know Moodle. So this combines all the possibilities you have for e-learning, but it goes further. We might provide simulation tools where you can already check what the facility in the future will give you, or more trivial MediaWiki. And then what they're currently working on is the integration of notebooks into the e-learning platform. And now, putting this all together as a training portal, we even need a further functionality. What we want is, and this can be, for example, achieved by the Elixir test system, we can call out to external resources. And that's important because we do not want to be the storage of everything, but we want to make sure that people find everything. So what we do is you can have pages where you just refer to resources outside of this portal at the facilities you're actually going to in the future. And all this is kind of still a vision. We are working on this, and the content manager will, of course, not only provide material, but it will provide upcoming events in terms of training or in terms of big conferences and so forth. Okay, Andy, you want to add something?
No, we have 15 minutes left.
Okay, good, thank you. Good. That was a very valuable contribution to my presentation. Good. We're now coming to the part which I like most, but we only have 10 minutes plus 5 for the summaries. This is all this IT stuff, yeah. Good. However, it's important, starting with the most important bit, which is the second part of the portal, which is not the training portal, but is the PaN portal itself. So different facilities have different ways of accessing local resources, data, analysis, framework, catalogs, and so forth. But what we want is that we want to have a PaN portal which gives scientists access to facility resources in an easy and standardized way, independently of the facility infrastructure setup, because we are moving around. And this is what we are currently working together on. A typical use case would be that you take a publication, you take the corresponding data. Of course, you do not want to do the same publication again. So what you do is you enrich the metadata with your metadata, and then with that you find more data in the catalog, and then you find an infrastructure, and then you take the data and the infrastructure and you extend the publication you found with the new data. So this is kind of theory. And how do you do that? So our idea is the following. So we start with the facility, and the facility provides you with, the facility provides you with already cloud services, remote desktop, catalog services, and all these bits and pieces. But this is something which is very complicated to use. So the idea is to have a portal engine which hides this underneath an abstraction and provides you with an API. And on top of this API, so this is what we call the backend. On top of this API, you can implement whatever you like, whether this is a command line interface, a browser interface, a mobile app, and so forth. But important here is that you come to the facility and you find something which is very similar to the facilities, your home facility, for example. And here, this even would be, here we would even be able to hide that the facility itself is using horizontal infrastructures or global databases or whatever is behind this facility, which is hidden but usable. Good. And now you go further in. This is not only at one facility, but it's at all the facilities. And then you can even have a vision where there's a kind of a super portal which is using the API provided by all the facilities and give you a merged view of the entire thing. However, that requires something. This requires that the facilities are working along with you. So what do the facilities have to provide, which the two projects probably can't because of limited resources is they have to actually provide the adapters from the API to their resources, very importantly. So, and it's more than that. So not only the adapter to the services, because we might not have enough money, they have to revisit their security and firewall policies. It sounds like trivial, it isn't, believe me. And they have to open their data to cloud mechanisms. Sounds trivial, isn't. So here we have some money in PaNOSC and ExPaNDS for this ICT work, but a lot has to be done by the facilities themselves. And this is something Andy wants to add, probably. This is maybe the last chance.
This is like, if we look ahead into the future, we don't see another funding program which would fund this at the same scale. For the moment, this is our unique opportunity to get this sufficiently advanced that afterwards it is run like an open source program where the usefulness of it makes it that you contribute things that different people in the community contribute adapters.
Yep,
exactly. It's self-sustaining, but this is still a way off.
So it requires an effort, not only from us, but from the facilities. But it's our job to let them know how important that is for their future. Yeah. If you are not doing this, this is not an academic exercise. Good. Now, moving on to something which is we are very proud of, because this is actually already the vision implemented. What we did is we are using a horizontal infrastructure. In this case, we are using the EGI Fat Cloud. It's very close to us because EGI is a member of both projects. So, and we are using this in exactly the way we should use it. So in order to create the portal, we not only need developers, but we need deployment, continuous integration, continuous development, and so forth. And we are doing this exactly in this horizontal infrastructure. So we are using the small DAISY cloud, which is part of the Fat Cloud, and the SF cloud, which is part of the Fat Cloud. And this allows us to collaborate between the two projects seamlessly. And so we had a very interesting technical meeting recently where all the facilities reported on their deployment effort. And this by accident is exactly what, let me move on, what Jean-François, the lead of the architectural working group in EOSC, is suggesting. The EOSC is a federation of your infrastructures. And this is exactly how we are using it right now. So this is EOSC approved and EOSC ready. Good. Data management. What is the problem? The problem is that we have large user communities, really large. 50,000 users. I don't know why they count this in 18 months. I don't know. With the heterogeneous profile, it's a huge scientific field: biology, material science, chemistry, archaeology, and so forth and so forth. And we not only have academic, but we have industrial users as well. So cutting this short, the data set volumes can be small, but they can be really huge. The yearly production is up to tens of petabytes. And we recently had the case where over the weekend, we collected a petabyte of data at DAISY from the European Expo. And here, this has already been mentioned. At some point, data has to be openly accessible after the possibly 3-year disclosure period. Good. So, and the IT teams are usually very small, so we have to give them a hand in order to achieve this. And Jean-François provided me with 3 use cases for them, which they want to concentrate on. The first is cold backup. The second is data has to be available transparently for data analysis. And the third is it transfers between facilities. Large data sets have to be possible. So this sounds like 3 different use cases, but for me personally, it is just one. Okay, so going into one fast because there's not much time left. So here you have the facilities with the portal, and this might be merged into the future EOSC portal if we are then at the end of the projects. I don't know why it's moving all the time. Good. So those layers are composed of the local portal for the data analysis and catalogs. For this facility-specific hardware, we talked about this already. This is the part we are abstracting. And now, importantly, the data layer. So every of those pillars has a repository by itself. And plus, and this is what we actually want to do, is there are horizontal infrastructures which can take the data and give you the ability to analyze the data later on if the facility is no longer responsible for this. As a matter of fact, the right side is actually a composition of the left side. It's not a company, but it's us again. But this doesn't really matter for now. Good. And what we need here is, of course, the wide area transfer between those repositories. And right now, PaNOSC Work Package 6 is looking into this. We are envisioning Globus, or we are envisioning the EOSC Cup solutions for data management. Good. Good. And now I have an additional slide, which is actually from Escape. This is essentially the same picture you saw before, but this is seen from the high energy physics and astronomy community. They are not so much facility focused. The idea of this is that you can see this as a huge data lake and a huge computing infrastructure. However, if you then break this down, you will find that it looks exactly the same as the picture we saw before. You see, before we started with the pillars, and now we start with the data lake. And so the pillars are actually then not so important because it's an entire data lake. And I agreed with Jean-Francois that we will build a connection to the Escape people in the very, very soon future, because they might have a solution for us here. Good. So I don't want to repeat myself. Last but not least, very important, I have only 1 minute left, the ARC blueprint, which is our blueprint for making AI possible for our community. And here on the right side, you see the blueprint, as you can see. So we have the IDP on the right side and the SP on the left side, and they're all connected somehow. What does it mean for us? This is what we had in the past. The service providers were connected to the identity provider. At that point, it was called Umbrella ID, so that everyone could use a particular ID to get access to all the different facilities. And now we are changing this a little bit in knowing that EOSC will come and that for EOSC this doesn't work anymore. So we convinced the GN people to help us with edu teams. It looks essentially actually the same. Service providers are connecting to a proxy, the proxy is connecting to the identity provider. So nothing changes except that now you are able to not only use your identity in the Umbrella IDP, but you can use your ORCID ID, you can use your Facebook ID, you can use, and that is very important, the ID of your facility IDP. That means you only need to know that you're working at DAISY and you can access the services in PaNOSC, in the PaN community. You know, this is what we actually want to do. And in the next step is that we will let the identity IDP disappear, the Umbrella IDP. However, it's still called Umbrella, and it requires a little bit of identity mapping, but only once. This is EOSC ready, because as soon as we are using a proxy, we can extend this to other communities. Good. Process and next steps. Andy?
Yeah, all of these, I think, have all been covered. So I think you can refer to the slides. We're doing developments. We are generalizing a lot of things like, for instance, Nexus. We are promoting Nexus. We're promoting electronic logbooks. And we still haven't compared all the different solutions so that we can come up with the right guidelines. But all these activities have been carried on. So I think, I don't know, you've mentioned all of them.
Not all of them, but a great part of them. Okay. So these are the next steps. Andy, would you like to elaborate a little bit?
This is from the different work packages. We are working together on the data management plan templates. We also, I've seen a question in the question and answer section. We are very aware that we don't want to make this a burden on the users or on the scientists. Yeah? Deploying the search API, once we connect it to the live data repositories, we'll have a real test for that. Let's see, the others promoting the reuse of the simulation development. I think you'll see that in the talks on WP5 and also in the communities. We all want to have high-speed data transfers. Most of us don't have it yet. And coming up with a common solution, we think is something we need. This is the deployment. What has been described in the last few slides there is very challenging. We all know from blogs and from different publications what to deploy, but actually making it work with limited resources at every site is a challenge. Another challenge is developing scientific training material. For that, we need the scientists on board. Yeah, and we'd like to be invited or like to invite ourselves to user meetings to talk to more users. Yeah. Making that all sustainable, well, that'll be part of the next session, I think, discussing.
Yeah, hopefully. So sorry. It's good. So would you like to cover the conclusion, Andy?
Yeah,
I talked so much.
I mean, I think what is most important, and this is often discussed in the clusters, is the real, you know, a lot of these EOSC meetings and EOSC working groups and groups you see there are not themselves providers of service to scientists. They're providers of services to other infrastructures or other institutes. Our case of ExPaNDS and PaNOSC is we are really serving the scientists, so we can bring along the real scientific use cases. I think this is essential for the success of EOSC. We provide data, and one thing that's quite heavily discussed is also providing process data and not only raw data. The search API, well, we'll see how successful it is when we can type in simple searches and find what we want. The data portal is one of the flagships of PaNOSC and has been accepted by ExPaNDS. So we have to make that fly. And then, yes, if we don't get involved, we won't be able to influence the EOSC. Yeah, it is time consuming. Yeah, so yes, the EOSC, what we want the EOSC to provide us. One of the things we often, actually it was in Prague, but we weren't at Eli. We were downtown in Prague. And I remember after a long session, I think it was the EGI work symposium was once in Prague, last year or the year before, and talking to some of the people there. There'd been a whole session on AAI, and one of the things that we spoke about during the coffee break was if EOSC could provide a Europe or worldwide solution for AAI, already EOSC would be a success for us. So we're expecting this to be part of what's called the minimal viable ecosystem, or MVE, which Rupert will tell us about. Moving data around in a seamless way is still something that's at the core of all of this. Long term, when we say long term, we're talking here of 20 to 100 years. We think that this should maybe not be managed by the institutes themselves, but maybe by the EOSC. We're all dreaming still of getting some compute resources for free, but it's, you know, there's never a free lunch, so we still have to discuss that. And the minimum, I think, that'll come out of this is there's a lot we can learn from the other projects. I mean, Fair is Fair, all these other projects are really providing a lot of information if you got enough time to read it all. That's what I would say.
So just to add on top of this, the biggest problem I see, which we have to achieve, is that the long-term data archiving and understanding the data for the next 10 to 20 years. All the rest is just a matter of money. The AAI will be solved. It is solved. The blueprint gives you the ability to solve it. And the compute resources is a matter of funding as well. But who takes care of data as soon as the PI doesn't exist anymore, or the facility loses interest, or is running out of their policy? This is absolutely 100% not clear. And it would be really a pity if we lose that data. It was expensive and it's interesting. And some data you can reproduce. You can use the same crystal again and shoot on it. But there is data which is by far more valuable because it is from the Earth. And you can't get it back. If once lost, it's lost forever because you cannot make the Earth again. So, and therefore, this is the thing which I see has to be solved in the future very soon. Okay,
yeah, I would say we shouldn't rely on private, say private companies who have big monopolies to be in charge of this.
Yeah. Okay, good. I think we are done. So what remains? So, I was so excited. So thank you all for listening for an hour. I know it's stretching your patience a little bit, but these are 2 projects and we did a lot. We did even much more things than that. But I hope you got a kind of an idea what we are doing, and I hope you will stay for tomorrow and the day after tomorrow, where we go into all those details and we have very interesting discussions. Thanks. Any last word?
No, thank you very much, Patrick. It was a pleasure doing a show with you.
Okay, yeah, same on here. Good. Okay, I would like to move the microphone back to Sophie.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks very much to both of you. If some of you are brave enough to be shorting a bit the break, I would like to ask one question at least from Volker Beckmann. How do we secure HPC resources for PaNOSC and ExPaNDS workflows? And these are resources from our partners, or do we go through, for example, PRAISE?
Andy,
this is something for you, definitely.
Yeah, no, I can only answer based on experience. So the experience to date is we have tried with PRAISE in the past, but the experience to date is that it was quite complicated and time consuming because you had different environments and not a long-term source of resources. So we're now going through this again as part of this project, and we feel that we need, so we don't actually use resources from PRAISE. We use our own resources. We have money inside PaNOSC because we have more money than ExPaNDS for buying and testing commercial cloud as well. And we're discussing with Okra, which is another project for getting good prices of commercial cloud services. But we think that anything that is not guaranteed for less than 12 months is not worth the effort, because it always requires an effort to move your jobs to another infrastructure, to move your work and move your data. So we're now discussing with EGI as well as part of the PaNOSC project to see how we can have longer term access, not eternal, but at least 12 months. Yeah. So yes, PRAISE has not been a good fit up to now, and there has been talk inside the EOS community of the extreme HPC, maybe, but I'm not very optimistic.
Mm. Okay.
Thank you. There was a question also on your third use case, the one which was reused. Did the second time they used this data set, did the team publish the information about how the data is represented and which software would be used to reproduce the calculations? I mean, did they learn from their experience or not?
I hope so, but actually the publication I think is behind a paywall, so I haven't read the publication, but one of the authors is here, Thomas is here. I hope that it has been Thomas. I don't know if you can have Thomas Rod's answer.
Oh, we have to give him permission.
He's actually one of the co-authors of this study on supercooled water.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes. Yeah.
Can you repeat the questions, please?
Did you make this data you reused from the third use case that Andy presented? Did you publish also with it the metadata and the software tools you used for the second time this data was used?
Yes, I think so. We did, but I'm actually not absolutely sure because the postdoc suddenly got an offer.
Okay.
So, pretty quickly, so I have to check. But that was the plan.
Okay.
So,
thank you.
But that actually shows the importance of being able to access the data after the postdoc or PhD student.
Exactly, documentation and metadata.
I would push our luck and ask again another question, because sustainability was asked a few times. With the first remark that is, we should stop thinking in PaN that 10 to 20 years is enough to keep the data. It should be much more than that. We should be thinking much longer term than that. And do we have any plans for maintaining the structure after the end of the EU grant? Can you say a few words on what we are starting to discuss on sustainability?
Yeah, so if Andy, you can talk about the structure later on. I have an idea on sustainability of data beyond 20 years. It is this will be different from what we currently have in mind. So like books which need librarians, the data needs librarians. So data by itself, doesn't matter how you enrich it with metadata, won't last for more than 20 years. If you're lucky, you can preserve the bits, they stay. But the content, what it means and how it has been collected, under which conditions, this information will go lost. So if you're really interested in data, you need institutions, or you need someone who cares about that data, really caring. That means as soon as there's new computers coming out, you have to check if the data can still be analyzed, and so forth and so forth. So this is a big burden, and it has not been tackled yet. So there are initiatives in high energy physics, DPHAP, it's called DPHAP, but essentially they're already lucky if they can make sure that data will be there in 20 years, only the bit preservation. All the rest, it needs more initiatives to make sure that the data is there, because we are losing interest in data. And as soon as you lose interest in data, you can throw it away. Okay, so this is my personal opinion. On the infrastructure, Andy?
I could just add a comment to, I think we all coming to the, well, a number of us are coming to the conclusion that not all data are equal. So that there will be data, if you take data from certain fields, which are really unique, people will want to keep that for as long as possible. And that means decades, even maybe centuries, assuming the world's still around. Yeah? There's other data which could never be downloaded after 10 years. What do you do with that data? You might just say this is data actually loses in value, and in terms of just for the economics of your infrastructure, the low value data doesn't get kept for as long as the high value data. So I think we actually coming to a kind of treating data a bit differently according to its value. And the second question was, will this infrastructure be kept alive, or what was it?
Yeah, but we need to wrap up now. Kat is yelling on me. So we'll try and respond to this when we talk about sustainability in Wednesday session.
Okay.
Maybe.
And as mentioned, any questions that we haven't been able to answer, we can certainly publish with the video at a later date online on both the channels.
Exactly. So this leaves 5 minutes for a break. A well-deserved break. Let me thank you again, Patrick and Andy, for this very good first session, and see you all in 5 minutes.
Thanks, Sophie.
It is time, so I think most of us are still online, some may be coming back. So my name is Rudolf Dimper. I have the honor to chair the next session for 1 hour, 15 minutes. I am working at the ESRF. Some of you do know me, and I'm working at the ESRF since a couple of years. It's a pleasure to be a colleague of Andy since about 30 years, a little bit more. We still talk to each other, actually. We even drink sometimes a glass of wine together still. So just to show that relationships can last for a long time. I'm the IT advisor of the directorate at the ESRF right now, after having chaired 2 technical divisions over the last 20 years at the ESRF. Let me present the panelists, first of all, to you, and I will share my screen. Here we go. These biographies have been put together by Renata Rendova. Thank you very much for having done this, very useful. So we have, in the alphabetical order, we have Christian Cuccinello with us, who is the project officer of the ExPaNDS project and works in the open science unit of DG RTD, hence involved in the implementation of the European Open Science Cloud. Christian also followed the activities of the architecture working group of the EOSC executive board, and his interests lies in the metadata frameworks for data interoperability and service federation. He comes from the business process engineering corner and designed IT and data systems for data analysis. So thank you for being with us, Christian. Then we have Jan Rosak, who is the chair of S3 right now. My understanding is that this is a mandate which lasts for 2 years, and then he has taken that over beginning of 2019. He is also scientific advisor of the European Science Policy at the Czech Academy of Science and member of the Ministerial Board for Large Research Infrastructure and advisor to the Ministry on RI-related issues. Thank you, Jan, for being with us. Then we have Tiziana Ferrari. Everybody knows, of course, Tiziana. She is involved in both projects, PaNOSC and ExPaNDS, director of the EGI Foundation. And we always come across Tiziana in everything which involves EOSC, which involves the Commission. She is definitely an expert in all the international research governance and knows almost everybody, I would say, in the EOSC galaxy. So it's important to know Tiziana. And then we have Rupert Lück. Rupert Lück is head of IT at EMBL Heidelberg. We bump into each other every 6 months when we have the IRO Forum IT Working Group. He lately is very much involved in the EOSC governance and has chaired, co-chaired the sustainability working group of the European Open Science Cloud. But there was also a lot involved in concerning the setup of the EOSC association. I'm very grateful for Rupert that he does this because he is definitely for us from the research infrastructure point of view an important entry point to understanding how the machinery of EOSC works. And as has been said before, EOSC is something which tends to become very complex as time goes by with more and more layers. So thank you very much, Rupert, for being with us. Now it is we have now the possibility to listen to short presentations, 10-minute presentations of our 4 panelists. I will be severe with each of the presenters to stick to the time. Unfortunately, I cannot carry you out of the room because this is virtual, but I nevertheless will make sure that we stick to the time and that we have sufficient time afterwards for a discussion which for sure all the people listening are interested to hear, because it's important to understand what the future of EOS will look like, how all this will continue to be being built, and under which framework, under which boundary conditions all this will come together. So I would like to give the word to our first panelist, and in this case, not alphabetically, but ladies first. Tiziana, if you could take over, and you should be able to share your screen with us and present your slides for the next 10 minutes.
Yes, I'm looking for my window to share. Okay, so thanks for this invitation, first of all, and it's a pleasure to meet all of you virtually this time as we cannot meet physically. With this short presentation, I'd like to give a perspective on the collaboration that we have been having with the Photon and Neutron community from an AGI point of view, but also from a EOSC project point of view. Before I start, I'd like to mention an initiative that was tremendously useful, I believe, which Rudolf has been leading on behalf of all the clusters that are today funded through projects. The e-infrastructures and the cluster projects recently came together with an important position paper that was published in September, where in this position paper we have strived to focus our priorities in terms of value proposition of EOSC. And I think a strong message that came from the Photon and Neutron community is about the importance of having fair data and related tools and resources, plus services in a federated infrastructure to effectively exploit open data. On the basis, on the grounds of this publication, which is very much in line with the requirements that the EGI user communities have been providing to EGI in the context of the EOS initiative, I think we have been building results in the past 2 years through the PaNOSC project, a number of dedicated support activities, but also through the EOSC project. And in this short presentation, I'd like to illustrate how the collaboration can continue and expand further with a specific focus on computing and infrastructures for data exploitation. So the first word is about the EOSC project, which is coming to an end in a few months. EOSC was the first implementation project and was instrumental to start concrete actions in terms of implementation of the components of the EOSC core according to the current EOSC architecture, but also successful in delivering user-dedicated activities through at least 2 different instruments, competence centers, where the project and the infrastructures participating have been delivering ad hoc support to large research infrastructures, and an early adopter program, which is a dedicated support action for 15 ongoing projects, which are shorter term and which we have been selecting through 2 different calls. In addition to these 2 programmatic or structural activities in support of users, we have been dealing with the portal and with requests coming from users engaging through the EOSC portal, which was launched 2 years ago. Overall, the portal today offers about 57 services which can be ordered, and EGI was lucky to have our compute services there, which are orderable as well. We have been processing more than 300 access requests for more than 140 unique users. After about 3 years, I believe we can say the project was successful in delivering integrated support, and integrated meaning coming from multiple service providers and multiple user communities. And from a specific point of view of the computer services, there's a diagram which I hope shows in a moment, if I'm not browsing too quickly. This diagram, especially on the right of the screen, shows how cloud demand has been growing in the EGI Federation. This has been a plus 80% in the last year, and a lot of successful piloting activities that have been taking place during the course of EOSC, and even in previous projects. I like to mention EOSC pilot have been continuing and now are in full production activity. So from an EGI perspective, I can say we can already see tangible results in making a federated compute infrastructure available for on-demand access. And through the PaNOSC project, this has been possible through 3 key partners, STFC, SESNet, and DAISY, who have the task of federating storage capacity and compute capacity to support a number of PaNOSC use cases. In the future, so looking at the 2021 until 2023, EGI, through a new EC-funded activity, which is called EGI ACE, where H stands for Advanced Computing for EOSC, we will develop and operate a dedicated computer platform for the European Open Science Cloud, which also contributes to the data commons. I will explain how in a moment, by providing a resource tier with storage and computing where open data can be deposited for exploitation, set of federated access services for managing the data, which is federated, and the computing resources, which are distributed, and then community-specific data analytics and simulation tools. This is an important project, as will contribute to at least 5 different objectives that I'd like to quickly illustrate. First of all, this computer platform will be fully integrated with the core, meaning being able to be accounted for usage, being monitored for availability, but also totally federated through the EGI check-in service into the community AAI system, which is the EOSC AI. We will have hosting resources for Bring Open Data, which has a public value. And in the project, we have selected to do this already for 3 different domains, one for health, the second for environmental science and the Green Deal, and the third fundamental science. But we have also capacity, which will be funded by the European Commission, which can support the PaNOSC use cases in the next phase, for example, from 2021 through the EOSC Future project, which I think was mentioned in the introduction to this symposium. And then as part of the exchange part, we will have distributed resources which bring high throughput computing, high performance computing, and cloud resources together with collocated storage, again with a strong focus on data for its exploitation. We rely on the best capacities from different countries in Europe, and this map shows the distribution of our providers at the infrastructure, platform, and software as a service level. We have already strived to connect internationally with other e-infrastructures, in particular with China, with the Asia-Pacific region, and the United States and South Africa. With dedicated data sharing and application sharing programs, which will allow essentially to warm up for a future EOSC, which is international and brings resources also from other non-European countries. I'd also like to mention an important collaboration with T-Systems. We aim at defining a blueprint for federating commercial cloud providers so that additional capacity can be made available at pay-for-use through commercial providers that are minimally federated through this EOSC core, and to set, let's say, to pave the way towards this federated model. This is the stack of services which I've illustrated before. So we will have federated resources from multiple operators. We will have federated access services which look at computing, AAI, and data. We will have platforms for data analytics, including Jupyter and Binder, and other mechanisms and platforms for workload management, and the thematic services in 3 different domains which I've mentioned. I highlighted here some of the components that we are also testing for PaNOSC, which are Binder, Jupyter, FTS, as data transfer engine, Rusio, and OneData. And these will be
2 minutes, Tiziana.
Yeah, will be continued in the future. The capacity at the infrastructure level will be grown over time. So we will reach a peak of about 40 million CPU hours, 124,000 GPU hours, and 23 petabytes of data for storing open data for reuse, which is a sizable amount of capacity. And we will also collaborate with HPC national infrastructures to pilot and define mechanisms for federating high throughput computing and high performance capacity. This is a bit an overview, a very quick introduction, which I hope gives an idea of what has been done very quickly through EOSC and also PaNOSC, and how things will evolve in the coming 3 years, starting in January. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Tiziana, for this very nice and concise presentation, and to stick with the time. Maybe just one question to you. What is, how do you see the link to the major European initiatives for HPC, in particular now the upcoming Euro HPC initiative?
We see a complementarity and the possibility to scale up and create a hybrid platform. So what we have in EGIACE is a plan for integrating HPC capacity, which is nationally funded and already operated in a number of HPC nodes across Europe. And the next will be to define with our HPC how HPC capacity at the exascale level can be federated as well, in a way which is easy to access with homogeneous access policies, but also in a way where usage can be monitored, and also access can be provided through solutions which have already been tested by existing user communities, so that we avoid reinventing the wheel, and we actually maximize on experience of existing use cases. And for these in EGI-HACE, we have identified 4 or 5 different use cases which are led by scientific communities, and ELI is one of these.
Thank you very much, Tiziana. Now it is my pleasure to give the floor to Jan Husák, chair of S3, for his view on the future of EOSC and S3. Thank you, Jan.
Dear colleagues, I will try, similarly to others, share with you few slides I have prepared. Hopefully it works. You shall see those slides now. Is it okay? Okay.
Yes, we can see.
Here it comes. So I am in a quite uneasy situation to speak about things which I do not understand in such technical details, and as all the other speakers who have been speaking before me, and I am also a little bit in a kind of schizophrenic situation, which is here indicated in with the 2 blue colors, because I am not presenting only from the S3 perspective, but also being a co-chair of the EOSC landscaping working group. I will present a part of the findings we have achieved when preparing the 2 reports, which I will essentially refer to. So my speech becomes almost obsolete in the view of the plenary contribution provided by Patrick and Andy, and the only reason why I'm continuing to speak is that it is an let's say providing a reasoning for the details which have been brought up already from, let's say, a policy perspective, which I may eventually represent. So I will be referring to the 2 reports prepared and recently published in the Commission publication services of the landscaping working group. You are invited to read them. The landscape report is available since September. The landscape analysis, which is a supplementary document to the report and deepens our findings based on the information provided to us by the member states, by the associated countries, other countries, and the EOSC-related project will appear soon in the Commission bookstore. We have surveyed a lot of infrastructures, a lot of policies and initiatives, but still it has to be understood that these 2 reports are just a snapshot, a current state of affairs, and are subject of very fast evolution. And with that, one shall also read them and understand them. But despite that, there are some messages which can be abstracted from that. So one of them is, and this may sound also very trivial with respect to the community I'm speaking to, is that research infrastructures in general are very essential for EOSC implementation, and that all policy measures which accompany those infrastructures are absolutely essential for EOSC success. And this is not a trivial finding in view of the need of aligning policies. And those who are engaged in these things are really understanding what I'm meaning with that. there are some positive messages coming out from the reports. So there is a developing understanding among the member states at the political level about open science, its perspectives, its needs. And this certainly is a good news. There is also already a fair degree of awareness about EOSC among the European and national policymakers. And most of the countries have really already started implementing some measures to support EOSC implementation at the European level. So all countries are reporting at least one infrastructure that is almost ready to be made available or even federated to EOSC. So this slide contains again an almost trivial but not very broadly spread message in the policy domain that all kinds of infrastructures, data infrastructures, in general e-infrastructures, but also research infrastructures, and this along all the dimensions they may have, so institutional, regional, national, global, and so on, levels are really important in their connectivity, and they are to be considered as an integrated infrastructure system, which is absolutely fundamental for creating and implementing the EOSC. And in top of that, I advocate here back home in Czech Republic, but also at the European level, that infrastructures, including research infrastructures, shall be considered as a very important investment, strategic investment at the country level, and they shall be considered as a part of the critical national infrastructure, because they are much broader in their impact than simply supporting research. This let's say integrated view on an infrastructure ecosystem is one of the very major messages we try to advocate in ESFRI, and it builds the essence in the ESFRI white paper, which we have recently published. It is also important to consider that despite all the political proclamations and policy measures, the bulk of the EOSC funding will come through different ways and the different channels from the national funders. And therefore, the EOSC sustainability critically depends on very broad palette on national strategies and national decisions. Similarly to research infrastructures, and we have seen that already, that just slight change in national priorities may sizably impact the entire European system. So diversification of an infrastructure portfolio is absolutely critical in that sense. I'm also trying, but it came much better as use cases and examples in the speeches of Andy and Patrick, try to advocate that research infrastructures themselves are really critical for the EOSC implementation, and in particular for the success of EOSC in its very early stages, where quality of data is a very important asset, as it really will determine the usage of EOSC in the early stages. And it is also important to recognize that research infrastructures are very critical for building scientific communities, bringing them together, bridging the gaps between scientific disciplines, and developing a cross-disciplinary understanding of the open science connectivities.
2 minutes, Jan.
Pardon?
2 minutes. 2 minutes left.
Yes. I will speed up a little bit and come to my slide, last slide here. I believe that from the science policy perspective, it is really very important to advocate at all levels the message that infrastructures and research infrastructures are really the backbone of EOSC implementation, and that the measures are anchored at the national level, and that lot of alignment shall be expected in order to make EOSC success. In that sense, the initiatives you're representing here, which means sharing of best practices, proposing common way forwards, creating thematic structures and systems, are very, very important asset here, as the coordination of infrastructures, the coordination of stakeholders makes a very important bridge to the users and services. At the same level, I would like to advocate here something which came also very clearly from our exercises, irrespectively whether from the EOSC side or from the ESFRI perspective. Monitoring is a very critical exercise because it has a huge formative effect. So it's not only important for understanding the development, but it's also an instrument which provides the possibility to align measures at the national, regional, and institutional scale. And I would also like to highlight that the visibility of the open science concept and the EOSC as such needs much more good practice examples and use cases, and it must be clearly demonstrated not only to the scientific communities, but much broader and even to the political level. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jan, for this nice presentation. Maybe also one quick question to you. You mentioned how important it is that the member states supply funding and initiatives which contribute to the European Open Science Cloud. Any idea how that contribution will be measured and compared to the Commission funding?
Actually, we are now in very, very early stages of the EOSC implementation, and the next move we are doing the step towards the association and let's say towards self-governance. It clearly shows that for the next few 1 to 3 years, the Commission funding will be very important as it will provide the seed funding for national initiatives. On the other hand, from the ESFRI perspective, we already now know that something like 15% of the operational costs of a research infrastructure is directly linked to data management, data treating operations. And this certainly is such a huge amount of money which simply is not available at the European level and must be provided already now by the different national and institutional funders. And this increases also the role that research infrastructures may play in the future. And the other thing, of course, is that I see EOSC as an evolving system, a kind of snowball, where also the national policies and national funders' perspective will align. And in that sense, once recognizing the importance of data management at the national level, we will easily approach a situation where then combining everything together with the diversity of the system as we have it already now will provide sufficient sustainable funding for the overall concept. So everybody must be aligned, and then funding does not become such a big issue as it appears now.
Thank you, Jan. So we have to move on. So I would like to invite the third panelist, Rupert Luc, to give his short view of the future of EOSC. So Rupert, the floor is yours.
So let me briefly try to take the opportunity to report a bit on where we stand with the association, and also a little bit on the work of the Working Group of Sustainability, which I have the pleasure to share together, to co-chair together with Lydia Borrell from Science Europe. If I may move on with the slide. Okay, so you are aware that the EOSC governance is in a transition phase. The first phase is ending at the end of this year, and we are transitioning to a new governance that will involve the EOSC Association that has recently been formed. And this will also form the basis for the European Partnership, which is basically a memorandum of understanding between the Commission and the Association. And of course, involves funding from the Commission side, as has been mentioned by Jan already, and the contributions basically mainly in kind at this stage from the member states and probably other parties involved. So I think there is one hint that would motivate if you have a need to, if you want to influence the future directions of the association, I think you should join. The association is signing their memorandum at the beginning of the next year. It has been founded recently in July 2020 by a nucleus of 4 organizations, which are supposed to have no extra kind of role in the association, but just to make sure that we don't miss the timelines and that the association is there in time. Recently, this initial association had their first General Assembly, where they set provisionally accepted first set of members, which is close to 140 normal members and close to 50 observers that we are looking at. And this will all take place in the first General Assembly, where also the election of the board, president, and also the setting of the budget will take place. As mentioned, the Strategic Research and Innovation Agenda, the SRIA, is an important document and an important activity of the future association. It will act as the precursor, quote unquote, for the future work program of the Commission. And it is currently taken forward by the Executive Board with various phases it has gone through. I think you have all been aware of the consultation document, which was a stripped-down version of the SRIA, and now the 0.8 version has been recently made available through at the symposium. The final, the 1.0 version will be appearing in December, we think. Why should you join? There's a number of reasons which I don't have probably the time to go through. Of course, I mean, we all are aware of the benefits around fair data, about supporting the open science agenda, and the stimulation of interdisciplinary research data sharing. But also at the same time, I think we are looking at an impact on influencing the strategic research and innovation agenda through joining of as many partners as possible from the European landscape. Coming a bit to the MVE term that has briefly been touched on, and that is very often appearing, that has been formed to a large extent also by the Working Group of Sustainability, where we have been tasked through the last 1.5 years to provide legal, strategic, and financial recommendations to ensure an operational, scalable, and sustainable EOSC after the end of this year. And this has worked through a process of developing a document on the future sustainability for EOSC that was initially presented mid of last year as a Stallman document, then took on board consultation feedback from the Executive Board, from the working groups, from the different Horizon 2020 projects, the Governance Board, then was integrated into a feedback document, and then now we are looking at a next version, or we are preparing a next version, which is called the Iron Lady, or most recently changed the term to Fair Lady, as some of those in the group has stimulated. which is basically proposing an iterative approach for implementation of EOSC, and that will involve an establishment of a minimum viable EOSC that will allow federation of existing and planned data, research data infrastructures, and the complementary services from the publicly funded research, and then further would allow iterations to cover additional sectors like the public sector and industry. And of course, this work also took on board several input from several studies, which you can see here on the right side. I will probably not go through all of this in detail, but there were aspects from the legal side, costing in terms of understanding the EOSC core operational costs, risk governance and analysis, trying to understand how expanding the EOSC could work towards other sectors, the assessment of the country sheet work together with the landscaping working group, and also a view on digital preservation and on long-term data preservation within another study. I should also mention that there has been a lot of work on trying to provide synergies with the views and the output and the input from the different other working groups in the governance, namely the rules of participation, and most recently a lot with the architecture and the fair working group, which in the end tries to see that we find agreement regarding the MVE establishment and the need to establish this as a first step, including, as many of you have probably seen, the proposal to form an EOSC core of a thin layer of horizontal services that would allow federating the data sets that will be brought on board from the different research infrastructures and communities. And then an EOSC exchange, which is basically formed in a digital marketplace that will build on the EOSC core and offer progressively a growing set of data services that to exploit these fair data, and then bring services such as those to store, to preserve data, transfer data, or there are services that will allow to compute against these data. The main focus on added value is, of course, the interdisciplinary infrastructures, to connect the interdisciplinary research infrastructures, and to enable cross-domain research. The federation of these research infrastructures and their data into EOSC via the cluster and regional projects is seen as an important and critical first step, of course. There has been a couple of core services, and Patrick mentioned the role of AAI, for instance. There is a couple of other services that we consider and together and agree in agreement with the FAIR and architecture working groups are needed to form the core, a shared policy framework to describe and to define how the data elements that are published, shared and used, and then an instantiation of the so-called EOSC interoperability framework that will include basically authentication and authorization, PIDs, an interoperability metadata framework. That is where a lot of work still has to be done, because we don't see this right now. A data access framework to provide data as a service management and access framework. A lot of work has been done in that area already to describe what are the services that are on offer, what kind of scientific problem they address, the capacity, who pays, and things like that. Open matrix, security policies and procedures are important. On the help desk and operational support, the web portal, and things like that. There's synergies and common agreement across the structure and process and the timelines that have been proposed. It is very important still to say the vision is not limited to linking the data sets to federating the infrastructures and aligning policies. Is more widely, it links the stakeholders throughout the whole of the data life cycle and across the European research system. It needs to be appreciated that there's a lot of divergence across the different groups and stakeholders, and the EOSC needs to really acknowledge that there's a lot of tension and needs to work to reconcile them And it seems that a lot of trust needs to be built to resolve those conflicts. And the EOSC Association seems to be a first step towards all of these activities. In summary, the MVE will enable the federation of existing and planned infrastructures for the benefit of publicly funded researchers and to access openly available fair data. And the MVE is a critical element in order to establish the initial implementation of EOSC and bring values beyond what is available in the individual infrastructures. For those who want to further look, the draft Iron Lady is available, so the liaison platform on the EOSC Secretariat. And with that, I would like to probably close the rush to this topic.
Perfect timing. Thanks a lot, Robert. Maybe just also a very quick question to you. I mean, you've shown us the evolution of this document, which is built also with a lot of feedback through the consultation processes. Will there be a Diamond Lady, or is the Iron Lady the end of it?
So the Iron Lady has recently rebranded to Fair Lady. I think it is for the time being. I mean, from what this working group can deliver, and the working group needs to conclude towards the end of the year. That's the current version that we have to that we will offer and of course publish. I think this there has been some discussions whether or not the work of this working group or of the working groups could continue and whether or not there is a transition and a handover. These discussions have not yet concluded, but I think it is clear that from the mandate perspective, the mandate of the working groups ends by the end of the year. And I think it would be useful if some of the experts that have been involved could continue and would continue their involvement in these activities, so that there is a proper handover of the lessons learned and some of these activities. Mm-hmm. And maybe there might be a Diamond Lady or something like that in the future.
But that would have to be then asked from the EOSC Association, I suppose.
Exactly, okay. That's the point. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you very much again, Robert, for your nice presentation. Then I would like to give the floor to our last panelist, Christian, who will definitely give us some more insight how the Commission sees the future of EOSC.
Sure, I'm trying to share my screen. Okay, thanks for inviting, and also thank you to the presenter that preceded me to make so easy my intervention, because I mean we are saying more or less similar things in the beginning. So what is happening, as Luke already said, Rupert already said, it's we are transitioning from an implementation of EOSC in Horizon 2020 towards the implementation of EOSC in Horizon Europe. So till now, Horizon 2020 have been implemented with a project mechanism, a standard project mechanism, and dating back in 2016, and we see an evolution of it, trying to let's say invest on creating a pan-European access mechanism, coordination of activities for onboarding national initiatives, connection of European research infrastructure and existing infrastructures, the investments on the development and operationalization of FAIR principles. And we also see, I mean, what we can recognize as EOSC is today, but I mean, it's of course, as Jan said in the beginning, it's a collaborative action. There are national resources, there are institutional resources, and we need an implementation system that recognizes that and is capable of summing up all the resources to create a complete framework. Therefore, I mean, it has been recognized that the best course of actions to implement EOSC is through the establishment of a European co-program partnership, and is why now we have an EOSC association that will sign the memorandum of understanding with the European Commission. But this memorandum of understanding with the European Commission comes with some requirements, and those requirements, one of those requirements is to have a strategic research and innovation agenda. What is this strategic research and innovation agenda? Is a document that provides the overall framework for the future activities and tells the Commission what the partnership needs to implement. Not only asking the Commission what to do, but also to present the overall picture. So the implementation by EC funding, that let's call it tier 1, by member states and national funders, tier 2 by institutions and communities, let's call it tier 3. And this is the scope of the SRIA, having the entire picture of the EOSC implementation for the next at least 7 years. So you all know the process of drafting the strategic research and innovation agenda that has been led by the chairs of the executive board, and you also know that is not a closed process. There was a consultation, as previously said. I mean, lots of responses, and the contribution of the working groups of the executive board that also are opening their products for a consultation, and we have the participation of the stakeholders from many fronts. But what also is requested by the Commission is a multi-annual roadmap that is based on the SRIA, but with the granular translation of the priorities that are identified in the SRIA, and let's say pointing the Commission towards what is needed in the next 2 years. This you already know that by the end of this year we need to have a SRIA that is stable, accompanied also by the multi-annual roadmap. What happened next? I mean, we are in close contact with the executive board, with the governance board, and we are reading the draft versions of those strategic documents to be able to fast respond to what is needed by the EOSC community, and with the aim of continuing to develop EOSC in a more cohesive and structured manner towards its operationalization. And it means that the SRIA gives and the multi-annual roadmap are giving the Commission the needs of the EOSC community and what should be funded by European at the European level, and what will be implemented also in the other 2 tiers of that are contributing to the development of EOSC. So here you see that the SRIA presents 3 main objectives that are open science practices and skills that should become the new normal. Open science should become the new normal, recognizing that, as already Patrick and Andy said in the beginning, are require new skills, require expertise to be embedded in the research workflow, but also it requires the recognition and to incentivize the open science behaviors. We need standards, tools, and services to allow researchers to find, access, use, combine, compute, analyze, and we also need to have a real sustainable and federated infrastructure that will enable the work of the researchers. And the SRIA proposes 2 stages of implementation. And one is more related to have a solid core. The second stage is to enlarge and enlarge and expand the offer. And the third stage is to really cover the entire research. Apologize. To cover the entire research workflow. What the Commission is reading as of now are several messages. Of course, I mean, the SRIA is not completed, it's under development, as well the multi-annual roadmap. So what I'm telling you are some thoughts that we are having towards the design of the first work program for what concerns EOSC. So what we see are 2 levels. I mean, a level where we are supporting the coordination of several activities, and we are going even a bit beyond what is written in this in the strategic document for EOSC, and we are thinking of granting some support to enhance the EOSC coordination. We recognize that at the European level, we need a coordination in establishing what are the skills and how to enforce, I mean, the preparation of researchers towards open science, and what are the skills needed to deliver, manage, reuse, share, and analyze for data and other research outputs.
2 more minutes, please, Christian.
Oh, yes, we also are looking at ways of contribute to the development of services and tools to underpin a research assessment, because that's a clause that is needed to establish open science, and to support the community in finding in coordinating the implementation of the frameworks on persistent identifiers, metadata ontologies, interoperability, and so on. And not only European community, there should be alignment also at the international level. But also we are looking at how to support the development of what is needed. I mean, developing EOS core components for FAIR, looking at the interoperable ecosystem of PIDs, infrastructures, meta resolvers, and standardized interface, the required API and the metadata framework, the services and tools to archive, reference, describe, and cite research software that is becoming a very important component as a research output and should be also recognized. And of course, we need to move towards what is already existing in pre-operational stage and put it to a more an operation and high TRL level to be able it's already in the pipeline, and we are looking at new ways of implementing services and infrastructures, also through procurement, especially building on infra EOSC 03 outcome. And as Jan said, use cases are important. So as you all know, the good experience on the COVID-19 data platform, and this is one example that needs to be taken as a best practice and try to be replicated for other use cases. And I think those are extremely important to demonstrate the EOSC value. And from my side, it's all.
Thank you very much, Christian, for this presentation. So we now open the panel discussion. We already have questions from the audience, but before going into one of the most popular questions, I would like to ask maybe you, Christian, as a direct continuation of your presentation, but also linking to the presentations of Andy and Patrick. How would you see the most important science case for EOSC, which would allow the Commission, maybe the member states, to judge whether EOSC is a success or not?
I won't say that is a difficult question. I think that, I mean, there are several use cases that we can have in mind, and there are some that could have, let's say, a societal resonance and so on. But from my point of view, a real good case, a good use case should be one that really can trace the, for example, the use of data from the access to demonstrate that those data can be analyzed, can be worked in a seamless way from where they are stored to the computational capacity. And sorry, I mean, I have a phone call.
Okay, then maybe.
I hope you don't ignore. Okay, sorry. And let's say elaborated data can be then restored, and but when accessing the data, I mean the metadata framework will enable the machine actionability, the direct machine actionability, allowing the researcher to use what we are offering as cutting edge, for example, cutting edge computational facilities, and as well that there are also services that will accompany the researcher in providing the same level of metadata when storing the results of their work, allowing other researchers to be able to do exactly the same thing. So those I think are the use cases we should look for, demonstrating that EOSC can be a framework of different resources from data to data as considered as, let's say, an infrastructure itself, to storage, to the computation, and with services that will really make the life of a researcher easier than what it is now.
And for you, what would be the key performance indicator for that?
Let's say that the completeness of I mentioned the metadata framework, the completeness. I mean the how let's say data are fair, let's say, if they are respecting certain standards that have been decided is on one level, how many times those data have been used, and if there is real possibility of machine actionability from their side, I think are elements that are now missing, but still in the pipeline in terms of tools to be able to measure such aspects.
Mm-hmm. I've seen on your slides that you mention on the multi-annual roadmap that you think in the time frame 25 to 27, meaning starting in 5 years from now, the impact of the European Open Science Cloud should be further developed, meaning that we can still do work on technical implementation of EOSC until then, because before it becomes a platform for scientists? Or how should one understand this timing?
I think that, I mean, there isn't never a full stop on a technical implementation of such infrastructure. Is a federation, is a continuous aggregation of resources. So why there are stages? Because I mean, we need some fundamental resources today, and we need to expand those kind of resources to more advanced to the more advanced needs of researchers, and then to really be able to cover any single aspect of what are the different research workflows used by the different research fields. And but by then, when we will reach the point of having offered almost 80% of the most used services and the most required services, the core might need to adapt to new technologies and so on. So from my point of view, there is a continuous effort of keeping up with the latest technologies to be able to offer the highest value to our researchers. So it's the fact that it's an overall commitment. I mean, it's why it's fundamental that those activities are led by a co-program partnership, because we all need to move towards the same direction. We all need to have a constituency of stakeholders that are in continuous agreement, discussion, let's say, and they are represented by a unique voice that is fundamental for the Commission to be able to give a response to such a voice.
Thank you, Christian. Maybe a question to Tiziana, which goes is also continuation. In terms of technical implementation, we heard several times the MVE, the minimal viable EOSC. How would you see the current state of affair of the implementation of the minimal viable EOSC? Is this something which is done, or which still needs a substantial investment now through the next projects like EOSC Future, the Infra EOSC 3, and of course your project also, which is the EGIAs? Do you think that those projects continue on MVE, or is MVE a done deal?
EOSC had a significant amount of funding going to federated AI, accounting, monitoring, the help desk, to name a few, and the marketplace. So I would say there are solutions which are well developed and stable operationally. What, in my view, is lacking still is a community understanding of what the federation in EOSC entails. Meaning what has to be accounted, what has to be monitored, what is the function which is federated and made available collectively through EOSC, which is not yet available through individual channels, which is a question which is closely related to the business model. So what needs to be counted and monitored, and where are the policies that have to be endorsed by the EOSC Association? I think that in that domains there is still a lot of discussion that needs to take place, and my expectation is that with the ongoing, well, the future project after EOSC, thanks to use cases coming from the ESRIs and very focused ones. As I said at the beginning, I think this joint position paper was very important, as it gives a priority to what are the use cases and the extra value proposition of EOSC that we should focus on. So with these use cases in mind, I believe in the next 2 to 3 years, there will be substantial additional development that extends what is existing and resulting from EOSC into something which is fit for purpose to the EOSC business model and the federated model. So I would say technically, I think we are in a quite advanced status at the moment, but there is still a lot of discussion on what is the federated business model of EOSC.
You may remember this plea from Patrick, which he expressed very forcefully for long-term data preservation beyond what we can do in the research infrastructures, because we have limited resources, but also a limited mandate to care for the long-term preservation of data. Do you see a chance that with the new projects, or at least then through the strategic research and innovation agenda, there will be an infrastructure which could take over data preservation?
I see data preservation not very prominent in this area. That is my personal point of view anyway. I think this is something the member states can effectively push, because data preservation initiatives are emerging in every country. These are already well advanced in a few, more in the project phase or conceptual phase in others. But these national infrastructures, in my point of view, will be the ideal custodians of this data with public value that emerges from the research projects. Okay. And these are those that are really mandated in the long term to take care of these. So I'm positive, I'm really keen in seeing how the member states will respond to this, because that's their call in my view.
Okay, which leaves, of course, the difficulty to know where the data belongs to, because obviously research is international. It is not at all obvious to know whether the data should be preserved by Germany, by France, by UK for a given project, right?
This is a question on data governance, and I think there was a question about Gaia-X for Rupert, so I will bring perhaps a link to Gaia-X. One aspect which I find interesting is how Gaia-X will look at governance in data exchanging. I don't think Gaia-X will ever look into data preservation, so it's a different angle. It's more on data exploitation. But data governance in a federated environment is a key element, and requires also some dedicated studies in EOSC, because this is in the direction you've mentioned, and this hasn't been investigated.
Maybe, I mean, to go to Rupert, I mean, maybe Rupert, first of all, maybe you could, in 3 words, explain to us what Gaia-X is, because not all the audience may know what that really stands for, and then how that potentially links to EOSC and the research infrastructures. So that was the question from the audience, and asked by Sarah Garrick.
Right. Okay. So Sarek, so Gaia-X has 3 works. I'm not sure that's possible. Gaia-X could.
Well, we have to have challenges.
Yeah, Gaia-X basically is a similar initiative comparable to EOSC, in the sense that comes from the commercial sector. It was basically initially driven by key stakeholders in the German IT industry, and driven by activities also in the economics ministry and a couple of other ministries. There has been synergies with the similar activities also from France and the French IT community and governmental additions. And so I think it is basically a French at this stage is probably a German-French initiative that is looking at bringing together complementary services to explore data across the universe and to make that accessible to the industry services. They have a richness of use cases, and they are quite far as I understand, in analyzing and bringing together use cases for various domains of exploring these services and how they can work with the data that's going to be made available in that sense. Gaia-X is also, as far as I understand from the legal entity side, is also an ASBL, similar to what EOSC Association has now turned into. And they are also quite new. So what will be the overlaps between Gaia-X and the EOSC still has to be seen. It might be that the EOSC, in a sense, could be understood, say, looking into the far future, as one of the use cases of Gaia-X. So there could be synergies, but I think this still needs to be looked into, and I think we are only at very early stages how to look at these aspects. So the association is new, Gaia-X is quite new. I understand there is now initiatives that we are proposing to build some, say, first kind of context and to explore what could be the synergies in the future.
Do you expect that Gaia-X will soak up a substantial amount of funding from the Commission?
So the Commission, I mean, that's my personal view. I think Gaia-X becomes more and more popular and the Commission quite looks into Gaia-X. I still think research data and sharing research data and cross-disciplinary research is still a big kind of initiative and part of the initiative, and the whole open science agenda is something that cannot be mixed up with the activities in Gaia-X. So as has been previously been said, research data sharing, I think this will never be, I cannot see this very soon on the agenda of Gaia-X. So I'm not quite sure. As far as I see, there is interest in the Commission to explore these synergies, but I cannot see that the funding for EOSC is diminished by the involvement of the industry level.
Thank you very much, Rupert. And now one last question. Of course, it's the icing of the cake. There is a question which was put in the question box from Theodore concerning EOSC becoming an S3 roadmap project, which of course would, from that point onward, for sure guarantee sustainability in a certain sense, because it would really be an independent research infrastructure in its own right. Jan, could you say a few words to that concept, to that idea? How would that be feasible?
Yeah, thank you for this question. Even so, I went looking to the questions and answers box. I hoped that you will not address it to me because it's rather difficult to answer. The reason why it's so difficult is that both bodies, whatever EOSC is and whatever it will be, and whatever S3 now is, and to which body it will develop in the future, are very, very complex, and therefore it's very important, difficult to see some overlaps. Definitely, and all those of you who had the chance to read our white paper, you see that there is an overlap in these policy considerations. We are really seriously looking to that. A clear indication that EOSC has huge relevance for our policy considerations is also that we have created a formalized group, a task force, which looks into the details of overlaps with EOSC. Most of the research infrastructures and definitely all the clusters are a part of this task force. But with having all this in mind and seeing that ESFRI is really pretty much enhancing and working on the concept of an integrated research infrastructure, eventually infrastructure system, and there certainly it comes to very strong interaction with EOSC. One has to say also that ESFRI is not a solution to everything, and a big share of ESFRI success is based on its informal character. So we definitely are capable to contribute to strategic policy discussions. This is one of our major tasks, to contribute to such a discussion and to facilitate them. But when getting too much involved into executive issues, into formalized governance, we would lose a part of our capability to react. So I don't have an answer, but I see this also as a part of a very long process where one shall carefully look to the evolution. There are strong links, but I don't see for the time being that ESFRI is a solution to EOSC.
Okay, but you wouldn't rule it out?
I mean, it would imply that ESFRI develops sizably from its current position.
Okay, thank you very much. Sophie, you still want to comment on this? No, I don't think so. So at this stage, then I would like to thank all the panelists once more. It was great to see your presentations and also to have your input to the questions. And I hope that you stay with us for the rest of the PaNOSC symposium. Thank you very much and see you soon.
Thank you all. Thank you also, Rudolf, for hosting this session for us. Thank you very much. We are now handing over, I'll hand the microphone back to Florian to introduce our next session.
I think actually the next session is normally introduced by Brian, if I'm not wrong.
Yes, I think I'm introducing this session, yes.
Not planning to steal your job, Brian.
Thank you. Kind of hand over the baton. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. So I'm Brian Matthews. I'm from UKRI in UK, and I am involved in the ExPaNDS project, where I lead the work package 2, which is on enabling fair data. And I'm going to chair the rest of the session this afternoon. So in both PaNOSC and ExPaNDS, we cannot go forward without our science communities. What they want from facilities and how they would see themselves using fair data is incredibly important to how we do our program. So it's my great pleasure this afternoon to be able to introduce two invited speakers who represent sort of two different communities that can give us a user perspective on the use of fair data. So later I'll be Professor Felipe Meyer, but first I'll be very delighted to introduce Dr. Susan Danker, who is got a PhD in biological sciences from Flinders University, Adelaide, and now works at the Department of Structural Biology at University of Oxford, where she has been since 2012, I believe. The coordinator of the Instruct ERIC, which is a distributed research infrastructure in Europe for high-end technology and methods in structural biology. And she also more recently has been involved in the EOS Life project, where she is the co-lead of the work package 5 on user management and access services. So over to Susan, who's going to give a talk called, I believe, Fair Data Instructs Approach and Current Work.
Thank you. So,
and just before you start, just while we're getting the slides up, any questions for the speakers this afternoon, please put in the Q&A.
okay, so do you see my slides?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Brian, for that introduction and for pronouncing Australia correctly. I think I found the sessions today really interesting, and I'm very pleased to have been invited to attend this. Instruct ERIC is a little bit peripheral to PaNOSC and ExPaNDS, but I see quite a few overlaps, parallels and synergies here, and I think in the future this will mean that we can try and work a little bit more closely together, and I would look forward to doing that. For those of you who don't know anything about Instruct, we are a European research infrastructure, and ERIC, specializing in structural biology, and we are, I suppose, honestly, in the fairly early stages of central coordination towards verification of structural data. But I hope that I can explain to you in the next few minutes what we have been doing. First of all, just a little bit of context. Instruct ERIC is a distributed research infrastructure. You can see there from the map that we have members of the ERIC in a number of European member states. It's currently hosted in the UK, and we also have EMBL as an intergovernmental organization member as well. We provide the research infrastructure for technologies and methods in structural biology to researchers in any European country, and also we have granted specialist access to international researchers as well in certain circumstances. Our overarching aim is to promote innovation in biomedical sciences, and we operate on a non-economic basis, principally, which is within the scope of the ERIC regulation. We can do some commercial work, but limited amount in line with the regulation. So specifically, because we have centers around Europe that have specialist technologies, which we call landmark technologies, we encourage the use of combined techniques by bringing together those technologies and promoting a sort of incremental pipeline of access for our users to enable their research to be enriched and give them a very powerful output. So, as I said, we're reasonably new to these processes of making our data fair, but we did start, I suppose, by our participation in a project, an EU-funded project called Westlife, which spanned 2016 to 19. And this project provided data processing and data management services to the structural biology community, so our community, and it supported integrative approaches. And it did that by creating new pipelines to link these services into higher level workflows. And the services were various tools. Quite a number of tools were available through cloud services, also data collection repositories, and it was supported by single sign-on portal, so single portal entry for users to access these services. And that was quite a successful project for us, and it sort of got us going on thinking about the interoperability of data. Inevitably, because we're a distributed research infrastructure working with a number of technologies in different sites, then there's quite a bit of complexity in terms of the different types of data that we manage, and where they are and how they're collected at source and how they're stored. So it's not a trivial exercise bringing all these data sources together. And also, incidentally, metadata is a key problem for structural biology researchers, which I'll come to in a minute. So following on from Westlife, where we developed a tools repository, mostly that was a key resource for structural biology researchers, and incidentally now has been made available through Instruct. Now that Westlife is finished, the tools laboratory is still available through Instruct to our community. We then, as Brian mentioned, became part of EOSC Life. And I'm sure most of you are aware of EOSC Life, and in fact, PaNOSC is a member of EOSC Life through CERIC, ESS, ExFEL, ILL, EGI, and GEONT. So they're well represented already in EOSC Life. And we, of course, are represented as one of the research infrastructures in the life sciences area. So the life sciences research infrastructures in EOSC Life also are very diverse, covering many different thematic areas, from human and animal health through to environmental data infrastructures and so on. So it's a very diverse, very disparate group. But obviously, we know that EOSC Life's, one of the focus of EOSC Life is to publish fair life science data. And it supports that with policies and guidelines and processes for secure and ethical data reuse. And of course, this is important because a number of our research infrastructures deal with clinical and personal data. So ethical and secure data management is key. It also populates the ecosystem with a number of life science tools, and we provide some of those tools that we have already made available firstly through Westlife and now through Instruct. And it enables data-driven research for the researchers in Europe through a number of open calls that EOSC Life is opening out to the community to test the processes, the workflows, and the management of these linked operational systems, passing data from various sources through workflows to endpoints. So EOSC Life is one of the cluster projects that is feeding into the European Open Science Cloud, and I think you're all fairly aware of this Open Science Cloud. We've been listening to its main objectives, and the key one for us is open science. So we need to make the data open. We need to have standards that are common, and we need to make the literature, the eventual publications, also open. So at the moment in structural biology, the data that are gathered at source. So in Instruct, for example, this is in institutions and facilities dotted around Europe. And so the data are collected into repositories at source. The data are not owned by Instruct, they're owned by the user. And so the user essentially enters into an agreement with the facility where they're collecting their data to manage that data for them in the way that is useful for them. And so far, Instruct has not been involved in this. So we don't hold any data that is gathered by our users. That is all managed at the facility level. But what we are interested in doing is ensuring that each of these facilities are equipped with the process to make the data fair, and to be able to transfer that in such a way that it can then be used and reused using the tools in the cloud that we have identified to provide the best possible structural characterizations and solutions that come from that. So Instruct has been involved in EOSC Life in Work Package 5, as Brian said. We co-lead Work Package 5, and one of the main aims of that work package is to develop a single sign-on and the AAI. And we have now done that. So we have established the Life Sciences login, the LS login, and that will be launched shortly. LS login will be used by ARIA, which is the Instruct access management system that manages the process of handling all of our proposals for access to our infrastructure. Incidentally, Instruct also uses Umbrella to allow login to Instruct as well, and it will also shortly allow ORCID ID logins too. So we're trying to, in our case, we're trying to be fairly broad in acceptance of various logins, but LS login will be common to all of the life science research infrastructures involved in EOSC Life. So we hope that this will be a major step forward in integrating that access for the life science RIs. And we've also been involved in Work Package 3 of EOSC Life, which is to manage the open calls, which call for proposals to find use cases very similar to PaNOSC and ExPaNDS that will test these processes to transfer data through various cloud resources and use tools in an interoperable way to make sure that can be done seamlessly without losing data integrity, maintaining security, and obviously upholding the FAIR principles of data in all of these steps. So we have at the moment an open call open. It will go until 22nd of December. And the idea is to find a number of use cases that will provide projects that have existing data and then expect that those data to be used or expect those data to use tools and workflows that can be accessed through EOSC Life to some destination. And we expect that these to be substantial proposals that will take up to about a year to complete. And so these are not just very small contained things. We want them to be multidisciplinary, cross-research infrastructure proposals that are relatively complex and test the ability for data from different sources to be brought together. So shown here, the FAIR services part of this diagram is supported by a number of work packages in EOSC Life. And because EOSC Life is a cluster project, the work packages are very interconnected. So Instruct is involved in pretty much all of these. Work package 2 is the tools co-laboratory, and that is bolstered by some of the tools that we are able to contribute there, and we're integrating with other tools that are available too, and workflows. Work package 3, we are helping to manage and support the calls and the applications. Work package 4 is supporting verification using policies and various specifications for the data that we need to manage. Work package 6 specifically is for verification and provenance of data and metadata. And work package 7 is for providing the set of integrated cloud resources. So cloudification, if you like. So for structural data, why do we need FAIR and interoperability? Well, structural data is complex, as I've said. In the past, there have been problems with primary data can easily be lost at source. For example, with diffraction data, you can lose primary data through diffuse scattering. There are also problems with perhaps imperfect data processing that might lead to compromised resolution of structures. And so again, if you have an ultimate resolution structure that is imperfect and that is then passed on to future research projects, then you have a sequential impact of that imperfection some way down the line, and that should be able to be repaired and rectified so that it stops that chain of imperfection. So the increase also, apart from loss of data and poor quality data, we have problems with increasing data volumes, as most of us do. And this poses problems with local repositories. We've already heard that there are ongoing conversations about how long primary data should be kept and how to archive it. And this is these are conversations that are ongoing with us all the time. With the very large amounts of imaging data, this is becoming extreme need. We've been looking at SB Grid as a possible solution, or at least the model that SB Grid use as a possible solution. The advantage there is that they store all their data after assigning a DOI, so that there are PIDs attached to all pieces of data and metadata before they're archived. But SB Grid is just one model. There are plenty of other smaller repositories that are emerging. And of course, we're very interested in how EOSC will develop as well. So the data volume is a major problem for us as well. So just coming back to the imperfect structures, how do we repair them? Well, it's difficult to do that. But I think things are starting to get better, because some journals are now asking authors to provide permanent links to raw data sets, metadata and processed data to allow reuse of original data to rectify those errors and to add higher quality structures back to the PDB. And there are a number of software programs that allow that, and PDB Redo is just one of those. So we're getting better, but in order to do that, of course, the data that is accessible for reuse must conform to FAIR principles, essentially. Also, the primary structure data collected for structural biology projects is pretty well annotated now, but the metadata is more problematic because, firstly, not all of the metadata that we collect comes from automation. It's still very manual in some cases, and so that means that in many cases metadata is incomplete. We have problems with ontology because the experimental data capture is very spread in different institutions through different cultures, and the ontologies don't match. In Westlife, we worked very hard on agreeing common ontologies, but it moves very fast. So even if you agree in ontology 1 year, then unless you have a resource to constantly evolve it and update it, then it's very often soon out of date. But again, this is getting better because many people are now using MMSIF files, which allow for the addition of more and richer metadata. So we are getting better at managing metadata, but there's still quite a bit that needs to be done. So this is a very busy slide, and I apologize, but this is my last one, I think. So what are we doing? Well, there's a number of projects that have provided help for us. There is Fair Assist, which is run from the University of Oxford, and that provides a list of resources for assessment and evaluation of data against FAIR principles. So that's a good source of information. Fair Sharing is a catalogue of metadata standards. Again, this is very useful and has been used for COVID-19 response for metadata cataloging there. And FAIR Plus develops tools and guidelines for life sciences data as well. So there are already resources out there which are very helpful for us. Specifically, what are we doing? Well, we have been the provider of an EOSC pilot in cryo-EM, establishing workflows that enable a user to obtain raw and pre-processed data with a file linking to new workflows that enable reproducibility of processing and deposition of these data into databases. So these are new workflows that take the raw data through pre-processing, through a number of analytical workflows using online tools in the cloud, and ultimately depositing those data in PDB-EM. At the moment, Instruct is surveying each of its own centres. We now have 12 centres around Europe, Instruct centres, and we're looking to identify the processes that they already have in place to make data fair. And it is fair to say that, as was mentioned in one other case, some centres are quite well aware of FAIR principles, and others are really not. So that there is quite a big variety of FAIR awareness amongst our centres and facilities. But by gathering that information, we hope to have a good foundation on which to start explaining these principles and implementing them. We're also working at the moment with a project called Freya, which aims to extend the infrastructure for PIDs as a core component for open research. They are building a PID graph to allow aggregation of all citations from research. So they can then follow the provenance of a piece of data through publication to its origin, through the software that was used to generate it or analyze it, to sample identification and so on. And this is a good model, I think, for us to consider in terms of keeping track of all these data in an interconnected and coherent way. And Instruct is actually planning a similar model to produce a research bundle that specifically deals with the different kinds of experimental objects that we have to deal with, assigning each a DOI, which then can be linked from one to another in a series of pathways. We're calling it a bundle, but actually it's quite similar to some of the other models that are being described earlier on today. And again, I think this is one of the things where we could probably come together and exchange ideas here. So I think that's pretty much all I wanted to say. You know, it's quite a short period of time to cover all these areas, but that's where I wanted to stop. And for some reason, it doesn't want to show my final slide. So the final slide just said, thank you very much for your attention. And I'd be very happy to answer any questions, with the caveat that I am not, as I'm sure you have realized now, a data scientist. So I may not be able to answer your technical questions.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you very much. I've just got time for maybe just one quick question, which has come through on the Q&A, which is, in your bundles, do you plan to implement the technique to store not only PIDs but also other addressing metadata into the bundles? So, i.e., are you going to wrap up more information in those bundles than just the TID?
Yes, I mean it's pretty early stages yet, so we're still scoping this out, and we're going to be working with Freya as well to identify how we do this better. But yes, I mean a lot of the experimental steps and the processes that we have in our sector have not been incorporated into a model like this successfully before. So it's early days for us, but we want to make it as rich as possible.
Thank you. In the interests of time, I think I'll have to move on. I'm sure we'll answer other questions in the chat later or offline. So thank you very much, Susan. I'd now like to move on to our second speaker. And while we set up the slides, just to introduce him, he's Professor Felipe Maya, I hope I've said that correctly, Professor of Molecular Biophysics at the Department of Cell and Molecular Biology at Uppsala University in Sweden, native of Portugal. He graduated in biochemistry from the University of Porto and has completed a PhD in physics, specializing in molecular biophysics from Uppsala University. He then went to Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory, where he founded the Coherent X-ray Imaging Database, which I think we're going to hear about. And since 2012 has been returned to Uppsala, where he's been focusing on X-ray ultra-fast single particle diffraction imaging and is co-pioneering coherent diffraction imaging at XFELs, including at the European XFEL. So thank you very much for coming to talk today, and over to you.
Thank you very much for the introduction. And it's, I must say, I confess, I feel myself quite an outsider in this conference, but it's very interesting to see of all of the things that are happening and which might one day help me out quite a lot in trying to make my data more available and fair and reusable. And I just like to give a little bit of my contribution to try to make this a reality and a more of a poor man's repository on how to build something from scratch. So this was very much, this CXIDB was an invention driven by necessity at the time, and I will tell a little bit the story. So first, just a short introduction about free electron lasers. So free electron lasers are kind of an amazing new kind of light source. They're huge infrastructures. So they tend to be extremely long. So you have some of the longest buildings in the world being these free electron lasers, like happens to be the one at Stanford. They're extremely expensive. So they are on the order of €1 billion, these kind of infrastructures. They also are the fastest in the sense that they produce pulses of light, which are on the order of femtoseconds, so extremely, extremely short pulses of light. And they're very powerful because, as you can see, you will be able to see soon, the brightness of these X-rays are amazingly bright. And that allows completely new experiments, which will then want to make the best use of data as possible that comes out from there. But to give you an idea of how fast this thing is, so if you take a pulse from an X-ray free electron laser and you compare it to a 1 minute, that's the same ratio as you have comparing 1 minute to the age of the universe. So these are really astounding numbers. And same thing for the power of a free electron laser. So if you take all of the light that shines on Earth and you focus it to a 1 square millimeter, that's the same peak power density as if you take one free electron laser. For example, the LCLS is a free electron laser at Stanford, but you could take the European free electron laser, it would be the same thing, and you focus it to a 1 square micron. These are comparable peak power densities. So it is truly an amazing machine. And given that this is so much, the pulses are so much shorter, the peak power so much higher than previous light sources, previous X-ray light sources, yes, 10 billion-fold increase in peak brilliance. So this allows for completely new experiments, and I'm just giving here an example, but there are many, many, which I would not have time to list. But one example which I'm particularly interested in is this idea of trying to overcome radiation damage, which is very important in structural biology. So typically, for example, if you're doing an experiment at the synchrotron and you expose the crystal will be damaged throughout the exposure, and this damage will prevent you from obtaining high-resolution data. But if you had a pulse of light which will be shorter than the time it takes for the damage to develop, then it might be able to obtain data from almost radiation-free samples, and so in some way outrun the radiation damage by taking advantage of the difference between the speed of light and the speed of shockwave. And this is just one of the kinds of experiments that free electron lasers allow us to do, and that's also what drives the interest in free electron lasers. But from the point of view of data, there's also another very interesting fact, which is that free electron lasers are growing in repetition rate exponentially. So here I have just 4 different X-ray free electron lasers, starting from Flash, which was the first X-ray free electron laser in Hamburg, started around 2005, so only 15 years ago. And we then had the LCLS, the first hard X-ray free electron laser that started in Stanford around 2008, 2009, and that's already have more than an order of magnitude. A few years ago, we have the start of the European X-ray free electron laser, and that's already another 2 orders of magnitude. And soon we expect the upgrade of the LCLS, the Stanford X-ray laser, to come into use, and that will be again some orders of magnitude. So this is an extraordinarily quick rate of growth in terms of the repetition rate, much faster, for example, than the rate of speed in computers, the increase in speed in computers, and also the rate at which storage is growing. So this presents a little bit of a problem. On one hand, these facilities are very expensive, and so we would like to make sure we make the best use possible of all the data. On the other hand, it's kind of expensive to try to store all of this, and even we're getting to the point where sensors are not able to spit out the data quick enough for us to be able to grab all of the pulses of light that are produced. So, but we really like to maximize the use of these facilities because they're really expensive. So they produce mountains of data, but they are serial as opposed to parallel, like in a synchrotron, and this is very important. So a free electron laser typically has only one or a few experiments running simultaneously, while a synchrotron like a ESRF, for example, has very many experiments running at the same time. So this results in a very select group of people which has lots and lots of data, and everybody else has no data at all. So it seems to be clear, at least for me 10 years ago, it looked to me like sharing was a clear solution. And I started to think about this more or less at the time where the LCLS started in 2009, 2010. And that's when I moved to Berkeley. And so I decided, well, I'm going to try to create a data bank for people to store this data and share this data. So the idea was just to be able to foster reproducible research. Also, many of these experiments tend to have very complicated data analysis. And so it's important for other people to be able to reproduce that analysis. And access to the data is a critical component of being able to reproduce things. Also try ideas of algorithms and new data analysis techniques on real data and not just on simulated data. And because so few people have access to real data, this was a bottleneck. And just also preserve these data sets for the future. So those were the goals that led to the creation of this data bank. There were a variety of practical challenges. So first, for example, where to get the funds. So I was a postdoc at Berkeley. There were no funds to be available for such a project. So that was one thing. And basically, there were no funds. And currently, there's still no funds for it. But it still runs. So how does it run? So where do we get storage? So storage was provided by NERSC, which was the supercomputing center at Berkeley that I was a postdoc on. So we just applied for storage and we managed to get storage. And then how do we create an infrastructure to actually be able to share the data? And So NERSC provided a lot of the infrastructure. In terms of the storage, in terms of the rest of the infrastructure, the idea was just to keep it as simple as possible. So just a simple static website to make the threshold to start making things as low as possible so we could get things off the ground. But there were, besides all of those more practical challenges, there are other even more difficult challenges, I would say, which has to do with the willingness of the community to share their data. Because currently, even though things are improving, there's still not that many rewards for actually sharing the data. And I certainly wouldn't have any way to force people to share data. So I wouldn't even often ask them. I would just wait for them to, if they are willing to share the data, then we are willing to take it. And it is currently not yet valid sufficiently in my point of view. And people are afraid often, for example, particularly in the structural biology, in crystallography communities, they're afraid to be scooped by other people. Or they're afraid that people find processing errors and other things in their data. So they often don't like to share their data. But there are several disciplines that have managed to overcome these problems. So I think this should also be possible. And well, the idea would be then to let's try to make it such that people do get some rewards from the data that they publish. So that it should be publishable and citable. And data sharing starts to, in some respects, be part of funding agreements and grants, and funding agencies are requiring these data management plans and proposals and so on. And there are now more rewards for data sharing. For example, there are journals that allow you to publish just like scientific data, which were just created to make your data more available. And a way to be able to reward people who do the work to make those data easier to access and available. So there are many steps in the right direction, which is very encouraging. One important challenge that, besides all of the issues with people not being really happy sometimes to share their data, there is the other issue, which is just how much work do they have to do to share the data, because the data comes from different facilities, mostly free electron lasers, but each facility has their own infrastructure, it produces their own files, different file formats. And to start with, I cannot really force people to try to convert to a common file format, but still I would like to give them the possibility to have at least a simple file format that would not cause too much burden on them. And if possible, that they would then use that file format to try to standardize things to some extent. And that would help, for example, data sharing across large collaborations where people gather data in different facilities and then would like to analyze it all together. It just makes things much easier when you're sharing data. So the idea was to try to create some kind of uniform file format, and I'm well aware of things like Nexus and so on. The issue was that people who actually took the data and then made the data available, they thought it was way too much work to then try to convert it into something like Nexus. So there was no real file format that met our needs. So I needed something a bit simpler. And so I decided to create this CXI file format, which is a little bit of a way to put in Nexus by the backdoor. So it's an HDF5 based file format. It is very simple. So it's not, it's made to be as simple as possible. That was a very important point. It's high performance basically, but that's just derives from the HDF5 base. And this would be like the simplest kind of infrastructure of the file format you have. You have some kind of root, and then you have some entry, data one. And if you are familiar with Nexus, this might look very familiar to you because it was designed to be compatible as much as possible with Nexus, but it was also designed to be somewhat more restrictive than Nexus to make it a bit simpler. This is maybe a bit more realistic data set. So it's also made to be flexible, because one of the issues that also exists is that there's a large variety of experiments that are done. So I'm not just trying to cover one particular kind of experiments, like say crystallography, but also many other kinds of experiments. So flexibility is very important. There's documentation for the file format, and it is extensible due to be based on HDF5. And this important part being compatible with Nexus. So how do we take, if you take a given file and we just tweak it a little bit, we add a couple of attributes, and then it suddenly turns out into a Nexus file format. So that's the beauty of it. We try to ease people into using more standardized files one step at a time. But even though I try to went through all of these efforts, the vast majority, unfortunately, of the files that we get are still in native file formats, which come from one or the other facility. And I would very much like to try to convert all of these into some more standardized format, but at the moment, I don't really have the resources to do that. But that would be one of the future goals. So getting the data into a standard format that is easily available and accessible, that's just one part of the part of the goals that I had. The other is to make things reproducible, and that includes also being able to allow to describe well exactly how the data is analyzed. And this is an example of one entry from one particular experiment where you have access to all of the data and so on, but then you also have this analysis description, which is simply a link to a GitHub repository, which includes all of the software that was used to analyze the data and to generate the figures that went into the publication, and also possibly with links to other software that was used. And we're trying to encourage this to be used more and more. And some entries are starting to use this, although it's a minority. But I think it's encouraging that some people actually go into the trouble of properly documenting how they are doing their analysis. And again, this is all totally voluntary. So it's a very positive development. So what is the current status of the CXIDB? So currently we have about 170 entries, 170 different data sets. This corresponds to about 650 terabytes of data. So it's a reasonably large chunk of data. And most of it is currently on tape, and this is growing about 50% a year. There's the good thing is that there is data from all around the world. So this is not just one facility or another. You have most of the free electron lasers around the world that experiments, we have data corresponding to experiments from that were carried out in facilities, free electron lasers from all around the world. There's also some data coming from synchrotrons, but the vast majority is from free electron lasers. The vast majority is also actually data from serial crystallography, I must say, at least in terms of data volumes, because those are experiments that could produce quite large data volumes. Storage and connectivity are currently provided by NERSC, and we're actually currently applying now for an extension of our grant to get this. And CXIDB now is a recommended repository for a variety of places like Scientific Data, Gates Open Research, and so on and so on. So it has been used now for almost 10 years, and it has become a place where people, particularly doing serial crystallography, do put their data, their raw data, which is very encouraging. But there are many future challenges that I'd like to point out, and one of it is just being able to guarantee the future in terms of being able to have resources and network connectivity for the future, and that's just something one has to keep on working continuously. And I don't, it's one of the challenges I don't really know how to solve. This being able to have enough resources, particularly storage, is going to be a big issue to host these large data sets for a long amount of time. The universal data standardization, as I mentioned, people currently, they just store their data in vast array of different file formats, which is unfortunate. It makes it a bit harder to understand the data that we get. It would be very nice if things would be more standardized. I know, for example, that the European XFEL has also used HF5 based file formats for their native data, which is very good, makes things much easier. And also other facilities are starting to do this, but it's far from universal. One very interesting idea is to have a tighter integration with the data that is stored at the facility. So instead of having to duplicate data, which is happens to also be stored at the light sources, link directly to data stored at light sources. So this would be something very interesting. The other issue is making the data easier to access. And we do provide access to data with Globus Online, but because a lot of the data is on tape, that makes things a little bit tricky. So it currently is not possible to access data which is stored on tape using the Globus Online. And I'm trying to figure out a solution to make this possible. If people want to transfer large amounts of data, which are currently stored on tape, they often contact me, and I try to facilitate this transfer because it is hard at the moment. And finally, one thing I would really like to have, but I don't currently have the manpower for, is to improve the amount of analysis and inspection one can do on data, which is without downloading it. So just being able to slice through an existing data set and look at different parts and try to do some basic analysis on it. But because the data comes from such a large variety of experiments, and you probably would like to want to do many different kinds of analysis on the data, this is challenging. And also the fact that the data comes in different file formats is already an important bottleneck, so that you have to overcome to be able to get to this level of things. So that's that's pretty much the story of the CXIDB and how to run a repository on a shoestring. And thank you very much. Questions?
Thank you indeed, Felipe. That's really interesting. I think we have a few minutes for a few questions. There are a couple coming on through the Q&A. I've got some myself as well. One of which from Volker. So I think you partly answered this. How secure is the future of this CXIDB? And is there a long-term commitment from sponsors to maintain and evolve it?
I mean, the long-term commitment of people with money, no, there isn't any long-term commitment. So it gets extended a certain amount of years at a time, and there are people who'd be willing to help. I've talked to that would be willing to help if this if the storage, for example, if there's a problem with it. So there are backup plans, but it's not like I have a 10-year funding available for something like this or storage. So it has survived for 10 years. So I think it will survive for the next 10 years, but nothing is guaranteed.
Yeah. So a question that I had, and I think someone else has put a very similar questions in the chat. So how do you see an initiative like PaNOSC or ExPaNDS kind of working with it, or working or helping with the data bank?
I think that's brilliant. I mean, I think that is absolutely necessary. And if, but again, I don't know how much of PaNOSC will actually be able to help with things like storage and these kind of things, like more basic things in some sense, but also expensive things. So if they are able, if that is possible, that would be obviously great.
Okay, I've got time for a couple more, perhaps. Do you consider the perspective of distributed data storage instead of just doing duplication? I don't know how you do the storage.
I never really thought about. I don't know who would be willing to carry my data. I never heard about so many volunteers. I doubt if I would have played it to BitTorrent, there would be many people willing to take it, but sure.
And maybe a final question. So you mentioned there are 170 data sets in database. how is this going to scale up? I don't know how many data sets are created at Exfil every year. Will it be able to scale up to the number of data sets that Exfil will take?
I don't expect everybody to deposit their data. This usually each data set corresponds to a publication. That's roughly how it is done. And if you just look at the European XFEL, I think one could keep up with things. But also, as more and more, as the repository gets more and more use, it's just a fact that one will need more resources. That's absolutely the case, at least the way we're doing it currently. I mean, if we're able to automate more things, then maybe we'll be able to grow more quickly and more sustainably. But we'll have to wait and see how that usage will grow.
Oh, thank you very much for that. Thank you very much, Philippe, and thank you very much, Susan, for your fascinating talks. I think we are over time, so sort of a virtual round of applause for both of you. Thank you very much for coming.
Yes, so I wanted actually to thank the moderators and the facilitators as well, who've done a great job. We managed to stay on time. I mean, as far on a personal note, is that it's been a very interesting afternoon. I have to close by starting with a few messages for all of those who of you who stayed until the end. We actually didn't lose many participants. I see we're still 116 online, which is basically 20. We've lost only 20 on the way. So that's I think, a very good score. This is, I should have said that as in my intro talk, this is only the first day of a 3-day event, because we are having tomorrow and on Wednesday morning the joint annual meeting of ExPaNDS and PaNOSC. A number of you have asked in the Q&A whether they could attend. This is open, so for those of you who are not directly involved in PaNOSC and ExPaNDS and who have not registered for that event, which was shown as a closed event, but I think we've got nothing to hide. So if you're interested in attending the sessions that are tomorrow morning and on Wednesday, you're most welcome to contact Kat and ask for, or register directly online. I'm not sure it's possible actually, so we'll see what we can do. But Kat has provided in one of the answers or several answers her email address, and you can get in touch with her to get the connection details. So that's the first thing I wanted to say. Some of you also asked whether the presentations would be made available. They will be made available, and this event being recorded, you will also have the possibility to get access to the videos. So we'll get back to you by email when this is all uploaded. And I take this opportunity also to invite you to register to the mailing lists of PaNOSC and ExPaNDS to stay tuned. This is something we'll indicate also in the email that we'll send to you. So there was a lot of very good, I think, information and insights during the afternoon. And I think the best way to close this symposium is just to get back to the coordinators of both projects and ask them maybe for a few final thoughts and maybe perspectives on what's coming next with PaNOSC and ExPaNDS towards the users or in relation to EOSC in general. I just would like to thank everyone again, the attendees, the speakers, and my colleagues who have made this event possible. So maybe we'll start with, I don't know, Andy, for instance, or Patrick. Who comes first?
So unmute myself.
Patrick, go ahead.
Yeah, okay. I was impressed by the last two presentations, and I think from them I think we are going in the right direction. So when you are in a project, then you get your DOW and then you follow this DOW, and you're losing a little bit of contact. But as I already said, triggered by Andy, we will now focus on use cases, and I think this is the right way to go. Especially from Susan, but then the initiatives from Philippe is great, and it would be super if you would kind of help him to solve his problems. We cannot solve the funding problem of his storage. This is not possible in this project. But what we can do is we can engage people using those kind of indexes or in those kind of databases and making them indispensable. And at that point, there will be someone funding it. I mean, this is the game we play with the EU for quite a while. Sorry for saying that. But I think this is actually the right way to go. And as a last word, I would really thank you all. This was a great afternoon. So, Andy?
Yes, I can also only emphasize, I really enjoyed the sessions, especially the last two sessions, the last two talks. So I see, I mean, there is strong overlap with what we're doing. You see really, these are real use cases. And I see something similar happening to what has already been suggested by the PDB, the Protein Data Bank, is we should be as repositories, data repositories, linking the raw data or the data that was used to these repositories. And we could do the same with the CXIDB. We should be doing the same. We should really be working together there. And I think this will help also reinforce this. I mean, I'm very impressed that Philippe, you managed to become a recommended or accepted repository for Nature's scientific data. So it's a sign of the high quality of the work you've done. I would close with one other point, is that the talks on the EOSC were also illuminating. You can see things are advancing there. I do get this feeling, I had this feeling this morning when we were discussing this in the executive board of PaNOSC, is we must really, the EOSC must stay simple to understand. And there's a danger of all these complex governance structures, and that in the end, people just shy away because it's too complex to know what you can do with it and how you can join and so on. It's a bit, we should be aware of that, should make it a light structure. And finally, I'd like to really thank Eli, and I'm really jealous of you because you're right next to a very good brewery. If I had been there physically.
The restaurants and pubs are closed, Andy. So we.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. So, well, I can wish you a lovely evening, and hope to see you all tomorrow again.
Absolutely. Thanks, everyone. Again, and so for most of you, I think indeed we'll get back together at 9 o'clock CET tomorrow. Thanks again very, very much. Bye-bye.